What's up everyone, how are you all? Today we are back with another blazing Naruto story. What if Naruto betrayed killed Reborn as evil genius? If you enjoy then please like, share and do comments. And also check the description to original creator of this beautiful creation. Itachi was 10 when he first met the blonde bundle of joy, affectionately called Naruto. The blonde was around Sasuke's age and for the life of him, he couldn't understand why his father had brought the boy home with him. His mother was thrilled to have such a cute child in the house and proceeded to squeal and smother him with affection. It wasn't until his father had brought Naruto with him into the meeting room months later, that Itachi was utterly baffled at his father's actions. His father wouldn't even let Sasuke into the meeting room, saying that he was too young to understand the talk that went on at the large mahogany table. Itachi was allowed in the room because he was going to take after his father's job when he reached age and proved himself worthy of the job. The job, of course, being an evil overlord. It had a nice ring to it and was always a good career choice in his mind. After all, who didn't want control the world or some part of it? Father? He questioned. His father set the child next to him and the only thing visible was the spiky blonde hair that poked over the table. A frown crossed his father's face before he set a stack of books in the chair and sat the child on them, making it easier for him to see over the table. Father? He asked again, this time catching the older male's attention. What is Naruto doing here? Fugaku chuckled lightly. He's going to help, of course. He stated casually, as if discussing the weather. Help, Itachi repeated, he is still learning simple math and reading skills. How is he going to help? By pointing out errors in our planning today. Itachi stared, certain that his father had finally cracked. The blonde wasn't a genius in any sorts. Sure, he was smart for his age, but nowhere near the genius level that his father demanded in his planners. Today they were reviewing plans for a new building that would house the people who gave them information. It was supposed to be a safe house as well for the other branches under his father's command in case of a bailout, which meant that the building was filled with unknown hiding holes and secret passages. Although, their information mainly came from the prostitution ring. Therefore, the building was a new hole for their clients to weasel information out of while doing their other job. On the front, the rooms and main dance floor looked normal, but each room was rigged to record information and provide protection for both parties. The workers earned 2 incomes and his father received information. Everyone was happy. Itachi, you'll be watching him during the meeting today. The younger Uchiha raised an eyebrow. He was reduced to babysitting? Before he could comment further, the door slid open and the ranks that operated under his father filed into the room. His eyes shifted towards the blonde who was coloring innocently on a piece of paper, tongue poked out of his mouth as he concentrated on coloring in the lines. Oh yes, so smart and evil. Itachi could practically see the genius oozing from the child. The meeting started with his father's lieutenant bringing them up to date with the current issues and the progression of their recruitment in other states. As the meeting continued, Itachi shifted his glance towards Naruto and they widened slightly when he noticed that he had suddenly vanished. His eyes darted around the room, trying to find the mop of blonde hair in the room, but found none. He dragged his attention back to the talk at hand and listened with half an ear, while he tried to find the child without drawing attention to himself. It wasn't until he felt something brush against his leg that he cautiously peeked under the table. Bright, blue eyes looked back at him with such an intensity that Itachi felt himself drowning in them. He pushed the rolling chair back slightly, giving him enough room to pull the child up and onto his lap. He wrapped an arm around his waist, securing him and making sure that he wasn't going to vanish again. The blonde child squirmed a bit and Itachi dragged the paper over, letting him doodle on the surface again. A soft sigh escaped his lips, making Naruto glance up at him before going back to his drawing. It wasn't until the building plans were laid out onto the table that Fugaku finally looked towards the blonde. He pushed the plans closer to the blonde and an odd gleam was set in his dark eyes. What do you think, Naruto? The boy looked up when his name was called and then down at the paper in front of him. Itachi felt like slamming his head on the table. There was no way this child could know what he was looking at, let alone any flaws that it might have. They had professionals for that. Still, the blue eyes skimmed over the page and eventually, a chubby finger pointed towards a corner of a room. What's this marking? It marks where a video camera is hidden, Itachi answered. Someone will find it, Naruto stated. What makes you say that? The blonde tilted his head back, locking his blue gaze with Itachi. 'Cause that's the first place your mom looks for spider webs when she cleans. Soft laughter sounded throughout the room, but Itachi understood what the blonde was trying to say. Where would you put it then? Here, he responded. In the ceiling fan or light. She doesn't pay much attention to it since the fan is broken right now. Fugaku turned towards his electricians. Move the surveillance to the fans and light systems. Put them in a light bulb or inside the fan somehow. Yes sir. They responded together and jotted down some notes in their folders. Itachi looked down at the blonde mop that was still seated on his lap. Naruto had a strange way of looking at things. By stating that the corner was a place often looked at by his mother, made them realize that most people glanced to a corner when they spilled information. No one would think to look at a fan or broken lamp somewhere in the background. Out of sight, out of mind. His father cleared his throat. We'll break here for the day and pick up 2 days from now. Hopefully by then, the new plans will be drawn up. You are dismissed, he said, dismissing them with a simple wave of the hand. Itachi felt a shiver run through the blonde's body and he was about to question it when 14 adults toppled onto the floor after standing up, due to their shoelaces being tied together. The small body on his lap was shaking with laughter, and he watched as the small face tried to keep a smile from forming on his lips. He arched an eyebrow at the mass of tangled limbs on the floor and felt his lips twitch slightly. Perhaps Naruto wasn't that bad. Itachi leaned back on his bed as he tossed darts towards the wall. It was with satisfaction that they landed on the bull's eye every time, and once the last one hit the board he silently stood up and pulled them from the cork. Outside his room, he could hear tiny feet scampering up and down the hallway and he was tempted to yell at his brother for making so much noise. But the noise faded away, allowing Itachi to grab the sharp knives that rested on the top shelf of his bookcase. He would always warm up with tossing darts before he moved on to the more dangerous weapons. With practiced grace, he slid onto the bed again and started to carefully throw the knives at the small target. Halfway through his stack of knives, the sound of small feet sounded in the hallway again, and before he could comprehend what was happening, his door was thrown open. A blonde blur launched itself at his bed and quickly vanished under the mattress, allowing silence to devour the room. Outside his room, he saw Sasuke run by with a small paintball gun in his hand. His body was speckled with bright, orange paint and he knew that Naruto and Sasuke must have been outside playing sniper. In a house run by an evil overlord, there were no games that were played for fun. Games were meant to stimulate the mind and test skills, whether they were mental or physical. Sasuke cast a quick look in his room before darting off to another part of the house. Once his footsteps vanished down the hallway, Itachi leaned his body over the bed and peeked under the mattress. The barrel of a paintball gun came into focus quickly and he pulled his head back before the missile could be launched. Naruto, Sasuke is gone. It was silent and Itachi considered looking under the bed again but decided to stay patient and wait for the small head of blonde hair to make itself known. Eventually, the tip of the gun poked out from under the bed, followed by a small body. Itachi quickly leaned over the bed and snatched the young boy up, settling him on his bed. What are you doing, Naruto? Naruto's blue eyes swung up to meet his. Hiding from Sasuke. Why did you choose my room? A snort escaped the boy's mouth. 'Cause he would never think to look in here, even with the door open. Itachi raised an eyebrow and Naruto continued. He knows that you don't like to be bothered and wouldn't think that I would try to hide here. Neither of us would want to risk your evil wrath. Evil wrath, huh? Naruto nodded and moved over to the small window, cautiously opening it. Besides, your room overlooks the training grounds. Little Sasuke was bound to go back there sooner or later, especially since we're not supposed to be inside when we play. With carefully aimed precision that a 5-year-old should never have, he focused on his target. Itachi stayed still while his eyes trained on the boy and he heard him take in a deep breath before letting it out slowly. The sound of rapid fire from the paintball gun sounded loud in both his room and the outside courtyard, but the cries that came from his brother were even louder. Faster than Itachi could see, the window was shut and the blinds were drawn, making it look like they had never opened. A slow curling smirk reached the boy's lips before he jumped down from the chair and quickly vanished from the room, his feet barely making any noise as he moved down the hallway. A small shiver raced up Itachi's spine at Naruto's performance and he slowly stood up. He barely knew anything about Naruto, and if he was supposed to be handling the young child, he wanted to know more information about him, starting with his background. The doors that led to the study office were tastefully decorated with wooden carvings of a dragon and tiger fighting, and when he was younger, Itachi would often stare at them until his father called him into his office. Those days had long since passed, and now he would simply enter without casting a look at the detailed carvings. But today he paused outside the room and idly let his hand trace over the patterns. A shout was heard from outside the building, and he guessed that Naruto had once again found his brother. With a sigh, he pushed open the doors and made his way into the large office. There were only a few places that Itachi couldn't get into due to his age and position, but Fugaku trusted him enough with most information and otherwise let him have free rein with his searches. Punching in a quick code to the heavy-duty safe, he wondered about the past that had shaped the blonde-haired boy. The lock clicked and he pulled the safe door open, revealing large stacks of papers regarding the family. Papers were stacked in here that detailed anything of value on the family. His father was always cautious when it came to matters of the family and never wanted anything that could be used against them in public hands. Itachi assumed that Naruto would fall under this section as well, seeing as the blonde was in the family job. Black binders stared at him and he skimmed the bindings for the name he was looking for before removing it from the safe. The binder was rather small, but then again, Naruto was only 5 years old. He opened the cover and found himself staring down at a birth certificate and a family tree. Normally this wouldn't be much of help, but a name caught his attention and his eyes widened as he traced the roots back in history. Namikaze Naruto, son of Namikaze Minato and Uzumaki Kushina. That would explain a lot. Itachi locked the safe and walked down the hallway to his room again, hand tightly gripping the binder. His father had never mentioned Naruto's parentage and he wondered if the blonde knew about his own past. Itachi knew that Naruto's grandparents had retired from the business and having the little boy in their house would bring back painful memories. Despite it all, Naruto would be safest here. Everyone knew what had happened to the Namikazes almost a year ago, but he never knew that they had had a child in the past few years. He supposed that information as important as that was kept secret to the public due to their enemies, and perhaps that was the reason the blonde was still alive today. Although, Naruto was given to them 5 months before his parents' death. Itachi shivered as he realized what this meant. Naruto's parents had known something was going to happen to them, and in an effort to save their son, they gave him up months in advance. No one knew about him, thus making him safe. But it also meant that they hadn't been able to see him during the last 5 months of their life. It was an ultimate sacrifice for Minato and Kushina, and he could only guess that it was hard on them. For the few times that he had met them, they always seemed loving and gentle. They were good friends with their family, although that was never public knowledge either, not that it would have mattered. It would have been a suicide mission to try to take out the Uchiha name because they were close to the Namikazes. The raven raised his fist and knocked on the door to his father's weaponry. After waiting for a second, the doors were swung open and his father looked down at him. The man raised an eyebrow at his sudden appearance but otherwise didn't say anything else. "Father, if they had known we were friends with the Namikazes, would Naruto's parents still be alive?" Fugaku's body stilled at the question and his gaze swept down to the binder that Itachi was holding. He had always wondered when his son was going to ask about the blonde's appearance in their life and when he would put 2 and 2 together, but he had never thought it would be this soon. With a sigh, he ran his hand through his hair and ushered the child down the hallway. "Your mother and I still question that to this day," he said as they walked silently through the hallway. "We were all close friends and it pained us to hear that they had died. You were still asleep that night. Kushina stopped by to hand off Naruto to us. She begged us to take care of him until he was at least 10. This way he would be old enough to take care of himself." Itachi looked up at his father sharply. There was no way that a 10-year-old could take care of himself, even if he was taught everything. His father caught the look and quickly shook his head. "She didn't want him to be a bother and said we could send him away sooner if we wished, once things calmed down. Your mother told her that we would raise him like one of our own and we wouldn't let him go at such a young age." You could see the desperation in her eyes when she first came by, and the pain that showed in them when she left still haunts me. "What?" Itachi asked carefully. "Happened the night they died?" The older Uchiha was silent for a while before answering. Those months leading up to their death kept them busy. Money was transferred to different accounts in small amounts as so not to draw suspicion, and everything of sentimental value was moved from the house. That night was a new moon, no light to speak of, and the force was quick. Bombs were set up along the perimeter and snipers were stationed in the tree line. The first set of explosions were so loud, we could hear them from the house. Itachi nodded. He remembered waking up that night to the loud explosions. His mother pulled him into her room, along with Sasuke and Naruto, while his dad barked out orders. Their mansion was tightly secured, but even that didn't stop his father from pacing while he waited for news. While they waited for the runner, Itachi held his brother, who trembled due to the suddenness of the noise, and he remembered his mother rocking Naruto back and forth, trying to hold back from crying. Now he knew why. When the runner came with news that the Namikaze estate had been attacked, his father's face grew pale and he demanded to know what else had happened. He ordered that several of their own snipers and spies be sent into the field to try to see if anyone had survived, but by morning, they all came back empty-handed. The rest of the week was quiet as the knowledge that close friends had died so suddenly. Did our snipers catch anyone? Fugaku shook his head. No. But there were several bodies that were recovered. They all had bullet wounds to the chest and head area, indicating that someone was firing back. Minato and Kushina fought back with everything they had. I'm sure they spent months preparing traps, and even now, there are probably traps that haven't been sprung. No one can get near that house anymore without coming back with large amounts of casualties. They stopped outside Itachi's room and the older Uchiha looked down at him. Itachi. Sasuke and Naruto don't know about this yet. Whether or not Naruto will know about his heritage is up to him. But you're already training him. Itachi stated, I've seen him and Sasuke play sniper with the paintball guns. No, he hasn't been trained like you and Sasuke. I only allow him to sit on these meetings because he has a fresh outlook on our operations, as if he were an outsider. To him, he's just playing with his brother. Itachi frowned. Father, I've watched him take aim. Today actually, and it's what led me to look up his files. His accuracy isn't that of just playing, he knows what he's doing. He paused. Do you think it's possible that his father showed him what to do, or perhaps he watched his parents while they practiced? The information seemed to shock the elder Uchiha. While he planned on letting Naruto ask about his parents, he hadn't thought that the boy might have already been exposed to his parents' job. It wasn't exactly something you would show a 5-year-old, perhaps he had seen someone else do it rather recently and learned quickly. Watch him for now, Itachi. Make sure he doesn't get into too much trouble and let him grow up. He nodded at his son and vanished before Itachi could ask any other questions. With quick strides, he moved to his room where he found his wife folding clothes on the bed. She looked at him and instantly took in the shock in his eyes. What's wrong? Itachi knows about Naruto's parents, he answered and sat on the bed. We knew he would ask about it eventually, she said carefully, moving to sit next to him so she could massage his tense shoulders. He relaxed slowly under her soft touch and let out a sigh. That's not all, Makoto. The child, he knows how to shoot already. Her touch faltered for a moment before they continued. Itachi told me that Naruto was playing with Sasuke today, and from what it sounds like, Naruto has an accuracy that he shouldn't have at his age. Sasuke was covered in orange paint today when they finished, Makoto said. And Naruto was barely touched. Sasuke hasn't been trained to shoot properly. He won't until he turns 7 at least. Even Itachi is still learning basic combat moves. The female shrugged and placed a kiss on his cheek. Perhaps it was just a mistake and we're looking into this too much. You know that they... I know. Silence filled the large room and Makoto stood up again to resume folding the clothes. Within minutes Fugaku stood as well and went to the closet so he could change for dinner. During dinner, Itachi kept a silent eye on Naruto. The blonde was happily talking with Sasuke about the things they were going to do tomorrow. It was nearing the snowy season and within a few days they were expecting a large blizzard to hit the area, and he knew that the two boys were dying to enjoy the outside before it hit. Naruto rarely liked to stay inside and was always outside doing something. Knowing that the blonde was going to be cooped up for the next week made Itachi wonder about his own sanity. He excused himself from the table, and no sooner had he left the dining room, did he feel two bodies attack him. He turned around and smiled down at the two cubby faces that looked up at him. Play with us, Itachi. Naruto chirped. Sasuke was silent and didn't say anything on the subject, but Itachi could see the hopeful look on his face as well. He let out an amused sigh. What do you two want to play? Chess, Sasuke immediately said. Naruto's face turned into a scowl at the mentioned game, and Itachi knew that the blonde didn't like to play the game. Sasuke knew the game well because Itachi had taught him, but the blonde was never taught the basics. His brother didn't have the patience to teach him, and they both grew frustrated whenever they tried to play. Maybe we should play something we can all play. Chess is only for 2 people. His brother pouted slightly. But we haven't played in forever, Itachi. Sasuke, it's okay Itachi, I can watch. Naruto said softly from his side, and Sasuke disappeared from the room so he could find the chess set before Itachi had a chance to protest. The raven looked at the youngest child and noticed that his eyebrows were furrowed, as if in deep thought. It wasn't as if there was anything wrong with the child thinking, but it was the silence that had crept over him. His breathing had slowed down and Itachi had to strain to catch it. Before he could delve any further into the problem, Sasuke came bounding into the room with the chess set. It didn't take long for them to start a quick game, and Itachi found that he had missed the quiet times with his brother. It wasn't as though having Naruto around meant he was a burden, far from that actually. He had helped to brighten the mansion and his cheerfulness was always soothing to come home to. Checkmate, Itachi said as he moved his piece, and Sasuke let out a wail of disappointment. Rematch, he demanded. A chuckle behind them made the trio look towards the doorway. The blonde let out a chirp of happiness and darted towards the male, who caught him and swung him around slightly. Once they settled down, he balanced the child on his hip and the 2 Uchihas walked over. Your mother said that it was time for you 3 to get to bed. Apparently, you guys had a long day. Itachi nodded absently to his cousin and allowed Naruto to be handed off to him. The child shifted in his arms and he set him on the ground. He grabbed Sasuke's wrist and pulled him down the hallway to their bedrooms so they could get ready for bed. Once they vanished, Itachi looked at his older cousin. Have we cracked the codes yet, Obito? There was a negative shake of his head. Not yet, but we're hoping with this new building we'll be able to gather more information. This is the last hurdle we need to gain control of the information network. Itachi frowned and knew that if his cousin was still having trouble breaking the combination, then someone else was still out there protecting it. For the past 2 months they had been trying to hack into the mainframe of someone they considered a rival in the business. The Akatsuki Federation was meeting them step for step and making it near impossible to get into the central computer. Whoever was working on the firewalls in the company was a genius at their job. They'll break soon, no one is perfect. Obito said and moved to walk towards the basement where the computers were located. Have a good night, Itachi. The raven grunted his reply and walked towards the stairs in the opposite direction. Outside he could hear the harsh wind foretelling the incoming cold front that was going to bring rain before the snow hit. He pitied the men working in the basement tonight and for the rest of the winter season. The rooms down there were kept cold to begin with due to the massive amounts of computers, but in the winter season, it would become colder. After getting ready for bed, he pulled out the binder from between the wall and bed so he could read more. Naruto's entire background was written here and he knew that the information had come from his own parents. Detailed accounts of favorite foods and achievements were documented from when the family had still been together, and at the back of the binder was a small baby book with neat, female handwriting. Outside, a loud clap of thunder made him jump and he put the binder away. It was late enough already, and if his mother came by and saw that he was still awake, he would be in trouble. He turned the lights off and curled under the blankets as another bolt of lightning lit up his room. Sleep had just started to overtake him when he heard his door creak open. His hand drifted underneath his pillow and fingers curled around the metal handle of his knife. The light from the hallway illuminated the body and he relaxed his grip slightly as the short figure made its way closer to his bed. Soon, a chubby face was close to his own and he could see large blue eyes due to the backlight. Yes, Naruto? I'm scared, Naruto said quietly, and Itachi could detect the faintest tremors of fear in his voice. Can I sleep with you tonight? Itachi shifted on the bed and lifted up the warm covers, allowing Naruto to scramble inside the warmth. He jumped when another fierce clap of thunder echoed across the sky and he clamped his hands over his head. The covers were dropped back on their bodies and Itachi reached over to pull the child closer to his body, tucking the blonde head under his chin. Soft tremors shook the child's body and Itachi wrapped his arms around the shaking body. Sasuke considered himself too old to be scared of thunderstorms and would stay in his room, but Naruto hadn't been brought up in Uchiha. No doubt, if his parents were still alive, he would have found his way to their room instead of his own tonight. The thought tore at him and his heart went to the child. Despite the brave and cheerful face that he constantly put forward, deep inside he was still just a child. One that wasn't used to being brave at such a young age. His parents' line of work may have been dangerous, but it was all done in the shadows and he didn't have to follow in their footsteps. He would never have to put up a fake face. But he did have to grow up quickly that night and adapt to the new changes that had entered his life. With that thought, Itachi tightened his grip and Naruto pressed closer to his chest. His determination was set and he knew that no matter what happened, he would protect the blonde bundle of joy to the best of his ability. He would make sure that no harm came to the innocence in him and try to protect it from all that the world had to offer. It was the least he could do for him. He placed a soft kiss on the top of his head and murmured softly, "Go to sleep, Naruto, the storm will pass soon. I'll protect you." The blonde mumbled something that Itachi couldn't hear, but he felt Naruto's body relax slightly before his breathing slowly evened out. It wasn't often that Itachi slept in, and even more rare that his parents let him oversleep. But for whatever reason, when Itachi awoke, light was streaming through the windows and he could hear the clock down the hall chiming 8 bells. A heavy weight on his chest drew his attention away from the clock and he slowly opened his eyes as something poked his cheek. Staring back at him were 2 bright blue eyes and he felt something rise in his throat. The yell never escaped his mouth as he hurriedly swallowed it down, but it didn't stop his body from pushing away from the face until his back hit the wall. His heart pounded in his chest and the small head cocked to the side. "Itachi?" He willed his heart to calm down and he cleared his throat. "What are you still doing here, Naruto?" "Oh," he chirped and smiled widely. "Waffles." "What?" he asked. "I want waffles and I can't use the waffle maker yet." Itachi knew this was true, but he couldn't understand why he didn't ask someone else. "Well, why didn't you ask mother or father?" he asked, standing up and stretching. The blonde stood as well and tried to walk forward to mimic Itachi's movements but stumbled over his pant legs. When he recovered, he looked up at the raven and pouted when he noticed Itachi was trying not to laugh. "You were still sleeping and someone could have hurt you," he said, and his voice dropped. "I was protecting you until you woke up. But then you kept sleeping and I got hungry." Itachi paused in his stretching and noticed that Naruto stopped as well. His lips quirked as the blonde wobbled unsteadily on one leg while the other was pressed against his chest. The raven let his own leg drop and with a sigh of relief, Naruto followed his lead. He leaned over and picked the child up and opened his door. There was no sense in keeping him from eating then, not to mention that it was rather late in the morning already. His parents looked up at him as he entered the kitchen and Naruto squirmed to get down. Once he was on the floor, he scurried over to the pantry and started to look for the waffle mix while Itachi pulled out some blueberries and milk. He heard his name being called and he turned to see his mother looking at him with a curious look on her face. "Are you all right, Itachi?" He nodded. "I'm fine, mother." "Why, did something happen last night?" She shook her head. "Naruto was sitting on your bed this morning when we came to see if you were awake yet. The storm scared him last night." Itachi answered and set the blonde on the countertop while he poured the batter onto the small grill. The answer seemed to satisfy one of her questions, but Itachi could see that she had something else on her mind. He ushered Naruto into the breakfast area where Sasuke was already eating and turned to look at his mother. "He wouldn't let us enter the room," she said after a while. Even though he knew who we were, he kept saying that you were tired and needed to sleep, and that he was protecting you. Itachi frowned. "He said something like that this morning. That he couldn't leave to get breakfast until I woke up or else someone could try and hurt me." He paused and thought, did he see something last night that made him act like that? I don't think so. But he was rather determined to make sure that no one entered the room. He had one of your darts in his hand, and even though it wouldn't have caused damage to a person, it was the fact that he thought to use it. The timer went off and Itachi pulled the golden waffle from the maker and set it on a plate. Within moments the sound of scampering feet was heard on the floor and Naruto appeared next to Itachi. He placed the small plate in the boy's hands and sent him on his way. Once he was out of earshot, he looked at his mother again. I'm starting to think that he knew about his parents' job. If he's mimicking them, then he knows more than he's letting on. He glanced towards the blonde who was pouring a hefty amount of syrup over the waffles, and his father let out a yell when he looked up from his coffee. He snatched the bottle away from Naruto and set it on the other side of the table so it was out of reach. A pout settled on his face and Itachi watched as blue eyes darted around the room, checking it for extra people. After deciding that the coast was clear, He ducked under the table and resurfaced a minute later. The syrup bottle was held tightly in his hand and Itachi watched as he pushed his chair further away from his father so he couldn't steal the bottle again. It took his father a second or two to realize that the bottle was gone and Naruto was out of reach. It was then that Itachi felt his eyes widen and he knew what was going to happen before his father even stood up. "We're going to have to start wearing lace-less shoes if we are to advance any further in our field," he said. Makoto looked at him for a second before a loud shout drew her attention back to the breakfast niche, where her husband was sprawled out on the floor with the chair laying on top of him. They moved to his side and she bit her lip as he blew a piece of hair away from his face and a look of annoyance settled over his features. Next to her, Itachi's gaze focused on the legs of the chair, where his father's shoelaces were tied. He looked up towards the blonde who was happily eating syrup-drenched waffles. When he noticed that Itachi was staring at him, he turned to look at him and a small but demented smile slipped across those plump lips. "That child," Itachi stated, drawing his parents' attention to him, "is an evil genius." Itachi shuffled as he waited for Sasuke and Naruto to come running around the corner. Despite the training that he received at home, he was still required to go to school in order to learn the basics that the world had to offer. While his father and private tutors taught him how to form a strategy and other important lessons, they weren't experts on the subjects he would learn in school. That and the schools were often the best networking for the future when it came time to pick consultants, guards, and other people to work on his staff. He glanced at his watch, reading the time before looking back down the road. Due to Naruto being a year behind Sasuke, his younger brother was very protective of the small blonde and made sure to wait for him. Even though Naruto's grade finished half an hour before Sasuke's, the young raven had demanded that his younger sibling come sit in his last class until it was over. This way, nothing could happen to him while he waited for Sasuke. By now, Sasuke was aware of Naruto's lineage and Itachi had told him that he had to watch Naruto when he couldn't. They still weren't sure where the enemies of the Namikazes were, but they were certain that they were hiding in the shadows waiting to strike. That, and since the blonde wasn't trained to protect himself, kidnapping the young child was a large possibility. Itachi pressed himself closer to the wall and ducked into the shadows as the sounds of tire screeching reached his ears. He watched from his hiding spot as a blue car barreled around the corner before flying down the road with no respect to the flashing school sign. It turned down a service road once it flew through the intersection and Itachi scowled at the driver for being so reckless. The wind picked up and darkened clouds rolled off to the east of the city as a new storm stalled over the flat plains behind the city. In front of the storm, the sky looked innocent and misleading with white fluffy clouds and mild temperatures that signaled the coming of a large night storm. It was ironic how peaceful the scene looked as people milled around the park area while the city's skyscrapers left parts of the grassy area in the shadows. Children laughed and screamed in delight while dogs barked at the squirrels in the trees. It was supposed to be where they went this afternoon, but seeing Sasuke running up to him without Naruto next to him made Itachi realize that fate had other plans for them. Immediately the elder Uchiha was on alert. Sasuke never left Naruto at school and his usually calm face was filled with emotions. Fear, anxiety, and anger played across his face and he was quick to pull on his brother's hands. And it was the three words that he said that had Itachi calling his father. They took Naruto. As to who they were was unknown, but Itachi's current objective was to get himself and Sasuke to safety. He wasn't sure if these people were planning to kidnap more of the Uchiha family or if they were just after Naruto. Whatever the reason, guards were surrounding them within moments of the call and they were ushered into a tinted car. When they arrived at the heavily guarded mansion, their father greeted them. Face stern but his eyes still showed worry etched deep within them. Itachi could feel the blood racing through his veins as they were led to one of the many rooms that they used for planning. On the table were multiple maps of the city along with possible routes that could have been taken. People ran in and out of the rooms, bringing in maps and barking out orders while they settled around the large table. Fugaku took his spot at the head of the table and the room fell silent as he focused his attention on Sasuke. Sasuke, what happened? Naruto's class was practicing fire drill techniques so they were outside during the last part of class and he was already waiting for me by the school gates. I told him I was going to be running late since I was turning in a project and when I was coming down the steps, a blue car came speeding along the road. The windows weren't tinted or anything, and for a second I thought it was Kakashi's car. But then they jumped the curve and someone grabbed Naruto as they passed by. Itachi frowned as his mind jumped back to the blue car that had sped around the turn, and he tried to remember the specifics, but the car had been moving too fast by that time. The windows weren't tinted? His brother shook his head. No, you could see the driver too. He had orangish red hair and piercings on his face, and the guy that grabbed him looked like he had blue skin. Akatsuki, Fugaku hissed and slammed his hand on the table. Damn it, they started to move. They must think we're training him. Dark eyes flickered towards the eldest Uchiha. Do they know who he is? The resemblance is too hard to miss. They must be going off that. If they continued down the street like Sasuke said, they could have grabbed you as well. They must only want him. Itachi nodded and glanced at the maps on the table. I saw a similar blue car speed by while I was waiting. It continued straight down this road before turning onto the service road. That's the main road that leads to the industrial side of the city, for which Akatsuki is known for directing themselves from. Sasuke curled his hands. He's only 10, he doesn't know that much information about what we're planning. What if they torture him because they think he's lying and not giving them information? They might be baiting us. The industrial side of town is a place we aren't that familiar with, Itachi said softly. The windows might have been untinted so Sasuke could see who was inside, either that or they just didn't think that anyone else was there. Silence settled over the group in the room, and everyone else who was running around seemed to still. It was an unasked question as to what they were going to do. No matter the reason for the kidnapping, it was still dangerous to send people into unknown territory. Men could lose their life and precious equipment could be destroyed or damaged, all for the sake of a young 10-year-old child. Itachi glanced at his father, who was looking at the maps. His eyes were unfocused, seeing, yet not. It was a hard choice for him because Naruto wasn't exactly blood-related, but he was so close to the family that it would seem that way. These were the times that being an evil overlord were difficult. It wasn't always about pointing in a direction and having your men march that way. The best of leaders were those that ruled with a steady mind and an even steadier heart. They needed to be stubborn when the time called for it and compassionate at times when gentleness was asked for. To balance these two was hard, and everyday people rarely thought about it. But even at times when the most logical answer comes to mind, you have to listen to other things besides your mind. As long as you approach it rationally. Get the cars ready, we're going after Naruto. We'll need snipers set up at all positions surrounding their known warehouses and a small group ready to go in once the way has been cleared. I want him unharmed, and if we can keep any of their men then take that route, if not, kill them, Fugaku barked. We leave in 10 minutes. Yes sir. The dark and serious eyes settled on Itachi. You will lead the group that rescues Naruto. Go make yourself familiar with the layout and figure out the best place for the snipers to work. Itachi nodded and swept out of the room. He knew that Sasuke wanted to go with them, but at the tender age of 11, his father would be reluctant to let him go. Especially since he was still learning to fight while Itachi was only 16. He still had several successful missions under him when dealing with infiltration and recovery thanks to Naruto's unconscious pushing. As he swept out of the room, he heard his brother asking to go, but the response was lost to him. His mind was focused on the task of bringing Naruto back, because part of him felt as though it was his fault in the first place. After all, he knew about Naruto's habits of sneaking around when he was younger, and he had never said anything. Thinking back on it now, he couldn't help but think that it was selfish of him to act that way, but at the time all he wanted to do was preserve Naruto's seemingly innocent nature. Itachi was 10 when he first came to realize the genius that was Naruto, but it wasn't until he was 13 that he came to understand the depth that Naruto seemed to hold. He had thought the whole incident with the paintball was nothing but a spoof, but seeing the gleam in those bright blue eyes, he came to realize that the blonde wasn't as innocent as everyone once thought. He kept the discovery to himself, as though it would help to prevent Naruto from losing more of his adorable innocence. The blonde always had an air of naivete surrounding him, making him seem as though he were innocent to everything around him. But Itachi soon realized that the child was watching everything. He truly was his parents' child. After the shoelace incident, Fugaku decided that it would be easier to wear buckle boots instead of lace ones, preventing further accidents. But despite the minor setback, Naruto was not deterred and soon found new ways to cause havoc. Itachi enjoyed watching the child's mind work in the planning room and took great pride in watching the small blonde bring grown men to their knees with his pranks. He also carefully watched Naruto and Sasuke play their not-so-innocent games, because it gave him time to watch Naruto and see the small mind work. The knowledge that Naruto possessed pushed Itachi to train and study harder in hopes that he could better protect Naruto. His skills at analyzing grew sharper as did his skills at fighting, and for a time, it seemed as though the blonde was acting like a normal child. He basked in that knowledge, thinking that the blonde may have given up on trying to be like his parents. It also helped that after sitting in the planning room for 2 years, Fugaku noted that Naruto was becoming fidgety while sitting in the room and listening to the talks. He stated that the child probably wished to play with Sasuke and told him that he didn't have to attend the meetings anymore. The blonde simply nodded and enjoyed the freedom by playing with Sasuke until his 8th birthday when the raven was taken away. A few months after Naruto turned 8 though, Fugaku decided that it was time for Sasuke to join the meetings in the planning room. His logic was that the younger Uchiha had some schooling under him and was old enough to understand parts of what happened. While Sasuke was thrilled with finally being old enough in his father's eyes, it left Naruto without a playmate. To Itachi's surprise, the blonde didn't complain about the loss of Sasuke. Sure, he sulked whenever Sasuke and Itachi would talk about plans or missions that Itachi had been on, since he didn't know what they were talking about. He would then plead to play a game, and the raven found that he could never resist the watery blue puppy eyes that Naruto would throw his way. Itachi was always content to keep Naruto company whenever Sasuke had meetings with their father, but he had never noticed the way the blonde would seem to blend into the background whenever Sasuke came back. He simply thought that Naruto went back to his room while Sasuke would happily tell Itachi what his new training would entail and ask for help. So it came as no surprise to Itachi that when Obito came running into the main room with news that they had the main code for Akatsuki, Naruto was already gone. Everyone was assembled for the meeting when Naruto poked his head cautiously in the room, asking Itachi if he could come in as well. The raven could tell that Naruto was tired of being left out and would have let him sit in, but Fugaku stepped in and told the blonde that it would be too dangerous for him, but next time he could join them. With a small defeated nod of his head, Naruto left and headed back to his room. After pushing away the image of Naruto's hurt face with some difficulty, Itachi was able to focus on the plans in front of him. It wasn't until he had settled back in his chair and was reading over a thick packet of papers that he first caught sight of the strange image. It was only a small snippet followed by a faint grinding noise, but he kept a skilled eye trained on the vent where he had seen the thing. A few minutes later, his eye caught sight of it again and his eyebrows furrowed. The noise sounded again and he realized that the thing was gone. It didn't take long for him to put the sound and disappearing thing together, realizing that it made the noise whenever it moved. And if his memory served correctly, he had heard that noise once before. From a toy that Naruto asked for the Christmas he wasn't allowed back in the planning room. He asked to be excused and his ears noticed the strange noise again. His feet led him to Naruto's room, where a closed door met him and he knocked on the wooden surface. There was no scrambling noise behind the door and it opened in a normal amount of time, but Itachi was certain that the blonde was behind the odd noise. His innocent face looked normal, with no red to make his face look flush, and the raven squatted down in front of him. "What are you doing, Naruto?" "Reading," he answered and pointed to the rumpled bed that had an open book on its surface. Itachi nodded and his hand reached forward to push back a lock of hair that was covering his ear, revealing a small earbud. "What are you listening to?" "Music," he responded, showing a cord that connected to a music system. The raven hummed and plucked the piece from his ear before bringing it to his own. He knew he shouldn't have been surprised to hear the conversation going on in the room, but he couldn't stop the slight shock from racing through his body. "Naruto, how did you?" The young child pouted. "How'd you know?" "I thought I slipped it in carefully enough." His eyes widened and he slapped a hand over his mouth in an attempt to keep from talking. Itachi didn't answer, but instead moved to the bed and pulled back the covers and pillows. Hidden under the mass amount of blankets that Naruto liked to curl up in was a small viewing screen and a remote control. Carefully, he pressed one of the buttons on the remote control and watched as the viewing screen moved closer to the vent. He turned back to the blonde who was standing frozen with a hand still covering his mouth. "What did you do?" Naruto shook his head frantically and pressed his body closer to the wall when Itachi stalked closer. Darkened eyes narrowed as he noticed Naruto's body tense and he lunged for the blonde as he bolted for the open door. They tumbled to the ground, with the raven rolling his body so the young child wouldn't be injured and straddling his hips when they came to a stop. His leg reached out behind him to kick the door shut and his hands tightened slightly on Naruto's upper arms. "What are you hiding in those vents, Naruto, and how long have you been doing this?" Again, Naruto shook his head and his blue eyes were wide. "Nothing. You're not in trouble, Naruto," he said in a gentle voice. "I just need to know what you've been doing." A slight whimper escaped Naruto's mouth, but he once again gave a negative shake of his head followed by a stubborn, "Nothing." "Naruto?" He growled lowly and his grip tightened unconsciously as he leaned in closer. "Tell me now." "It hurts," Naruto cried out after moments of silence and squirmed under the tight grip. "Please Itachi, let me go." Itachi blinked at the choked-out sob and he quickly released his grip. He pulled the blonde into an embrace, running a gentle hand over his back in order to calm the child down while he muttered soft words. Wet drops fell onto his shirt and he cursed himself for slipping. Naruto didn't need to be interrogated like an enemy. "I'm sorry, Naruto, I didn't mean to do that to you," he said softly. "It just surprised me, that's all. I just wanted to know what was going on. It's all you and Sasuke talk about and I was lonely." Naruto wailed into his neck. "The vents are too small for me now." The information made Itachi jerk back in surprise and he wanted to ask how long Naruto been crawling through the vents, but he had a feeling that the child would clam up again. Instead, he shifted the attention back to original reason he came to see the blonde. "What are you using now? It sounds like the toy truck you got for Christmas." Naruto nodded. "I put a small camera in the back of it," he peeked up carefully. "You're not going to tell your dad, are you?" Itachi faltered at the question and he found himself unsure about the question. Knowing that someone could be listening through the vents proved a problem, but at the same time, he didn't want Naruto to get in trouble. His father would no doubt think it was another one of his pranks and possibly laugh it off, but there was a chance that he wouldn't find it funny at all. "You'll be fine, but I don't think you'll be able to use the vents after this," Itachi answered and set Naruto on the bed. He picked up the viewer and remote. "I'll fix this tonight after the meeting." Naruto nodded sadly and the raven ruffled his locks fondly. "I'll play with you tomorrow and show you how to throw darts if you behave the rest of the night," he said, moving towards the door. "I'm sure if you ask Sasuke, he'll play something with you too." The blonde didn't answer but nodded anyway. It wasn't until Itachi was walking back into the room that he realized what had just happened in Naruto's room. Not only had the child mounted a small spy camera on a remote control car, but he also fought through a mock interrogation, even if he broke quickly. The stubbornness wasn't just a child acting out, he was learning the inner workings of spies as well. While he tried to think about it as nothing more than a stage, he couldn't help but worry about Naruto's childhood. His mentality was maturing quickly and he wasn't sure when the child was learning everything. Because despite the genius that he showed that day, it didn't extend to his throwing skills, which Itachi learned quickly the next day after losing a lamp to dart practice. So it was rather easy to brush off the whole spy incident as just an act. After that meeting, technicians were called in to work on the vents. They were shrunk to the smallest possible size and small locked gates were placed every few feet along the entire system. It was deemed foolproof and the incident was stored away in Itachi's mind as Naruto showed signs of behaving like that of a normal child. Because of this, Itachi never told Fugaku about the spy and interrogation incident since he never saw a point to it. Naruto stopped listening in on the meetings and even if he had listened to previous meetings, he doubted that the child knew what was going on. Even when he was in the planning room when he was younger, he never showed any interest unless he was called on. Therefore, it was safe to say that Naruto was once again innocent to the deeds going on in the mansion. But now at age 10, Naruto was older and wiser about the hidden agenda in the mansion, and Itachi was beginning to realize how wrong he had been about not saying anything to his father. Naruto knew information, that much he was sure of, but how far it extended was a big uncertainty. Should he break during an interrogation, everything could be at stake. As he moved through the lower levels of the mansion to retrieve the needed blueprints, his mind subtly provided the thought that Naruto's capture couldn't have happened without help. The school was silent on when they did the random fire drills and Naruto had happened to hear them mentioning it in the staff room 2 days ago. The blonde had come home extremely proud of himself for knowing something that was supposed to be so secret and proceeded to tell Itachi all about it. They'd have to check over the school records once they came back and Naruto was safe. Getting the young blonde back was the only thing that ran through Itachi's mind as he spread out new blueprints of the older parts of the city. One thing that they had over the Akatsuki was the knowledge of the buildings. They had at least one engineer involved in all the projects that happened throughout the city, therefore, giving them the blueprints to every building ever built. He quickly located the correct map and spread it out on the table, allowing it to project on the screen. Pulling out a red Sharpie, he marked down several key locations to place their pawns and started to formulate a plan. If the Akatsuki group kidnapped Naruto due to his heritage, there had to be a reason behind it. The child wasn't dangerous yet, and if he didn't take any training, he would stay innocent to the acts that happened at the mansion. He was certain that the group thought they were training him and needed to be disposed of before he developed his parents' skill. The idea that they wanted him for themselves crossed his mind and he quickly stamped it down. They couldn't have him. Not only was Naruto an Uchiha of sorts, but Itachi had also promised to protect him 5 years ago, saying that he would protect the innocence that was Naruto and keep him from harm. And he had no intent on backing down from that promise. Once the plan was formed, he moved outside the room where he noticed one of the commanders under his father's control waiting for him. The man was in charge of the group that was going to go after Naruto directly, and today he was under Itachi's command. This map shows key points surrounding the building that will give the snipers a good position if someone should escape, Itachi stated as he showed the map to the man. I'm certain that the place will be crawling with underlings, but it'll be best for Naruto's safety if we can get in unnoticed. That means that we can't go around killing everyone in sight, the man finished, and Itachi nodded. This mission was something that required stealth, and while the snipers would be set up around the perimeter, any excess noise would just draw the Akatsuki's attention to their location. Instead, he was taking a small, 5-member group that would follow his orders while another group watched their movements and made sure the area was secure. He glanced at the man and questioned if there was anything else that should be covered. No, if we cover the entranceways, we'll be able to prevent them from escaping. I would suggest using the top air vents so long as they aren't being protected. They'll lead straight to the inside top floor, he answered, handing the map back to Itachi. They emerged outside and Itachi squinted against the bright sun. To the right side of their house, dark clouds rumbled away from the city, leaving in their wake a clear blue sky. One that reminded everyone of the energetic blonde, and it only steeled their resolve to bring him back. But it served as a reminder to Itachi that if they didn't hurry, things would get harder for them. The rain would slow things down and make it harder to track the group. Not only that, but Naruto still didn't like storms. The vans moved out one at a time so they didn't draw suspicion. Several had already left earlier once the order had been given, and the snipers were already waiting in the shadows of the tall factories. Itachi's eyes narrowed as they raced down the road and silence enveloped the car. His father was going to be working the surveillance from the mansion while he relayed information back to the troops on the ground. He was now in charge of this mission to bring the blonde back, and failure wasn't even on his mind today. This wasn't just some test mission where a mistake could be overlooked. Innocent lives were on the line today, and he wouldn't let any of them die on his hands. Information was coming in from all sides of the fields, as the snipers gave the all-clear call and their van parked behind a building. They'd go the rest of the way on foot so they wouldn't draw suspicion. As they crept closer to the shadows, the area was oddly silent as all the mills had been turned off, leaving only the occasional sound of an animal scurrying off in the distance. Approaching target, 1 mile and enclosing. Itachi nodded and froze as soft mutterings reached his ears, making him hold out his hand. The group froze and blended into the shadows as 2 males walked down an alleyway. Underlings, Itachi whispered. Don't waste gunfire on them. It'll only alert Akatsuki to our position. Silently, knives were pulled out and the first 2 men ran forward, taking out the small members with accurate precision. Once they were down, the commander stepped forward and plucked out a small black earpiece. His fingers skimmed the buttons on it, searching for the frequency, trying to decide if the members were required to report in. When no noise crackled through the earpiece, he sighed in relief and motioned for everyone to move. They're not trained to report when someone goes missing, he stated. That means that this force is still freshly trained on following orders, making our job easier. Loud gunshots were heard from the building, making everyone freeze, and Itachi heard frantic cursing coming from his headset. The screams that they couldn't get a clear shot inside the building and that something was happening inside the area made a drop of cold sweat run down his face. A loud explosion made him snap his head up towards the top of the building where smoke was rapidly pouring out of the vents, and he cursed. "What's going on in there?" he snarled. "We can't see. Someone dropped a smoke bomb or something. Can't get a clear shot even if we tried. It looks like someone blew up the vents. Besides, we hadn't located the target inside the building yet, and it's too dangerous to go in now." The commander shifted. "It could be an escape attempt if they know we're close by. I'll have the snipers watch the exits carefully." Itachi nodded. "We're going in. Now would be the best time if they're moving away from us. We can hit them from behind." The front door was kicked open as the front person carefully walked in once the sniper above them cleared it. The rest of the members slunk in after him, ready to fire at anything that didn't belong to them, but they froze at the sight before them. A large empty first floor greeted them, where a single chair sat in the middle of the room with cut ropes surrounding the feet of it. "They already left," someone breathed out, shock and disappointment lacing his voice. Itachi's hand tightened around his weapon and he fought the urge to hurl it across the room. Instead, he sucked in a deep breath and tried to regain control over his emotions. "Check the rest of the warehouse. If they're still in here, we're sitting targets in." He paused as a dripping sound reached his ears. Turning around, his boot splashed against something wet and he glanced up, eyes going wide. What the hell? A dead body lay on the catwalk above them with a bullet wound through his chest. It wasn't one of their men, but rather, one of Akatsuki's. "Sir, there are more dead bodies over here," a voice called out. "And they're all Akatsuki's. Search the rest of the place, you know the rules." Everyone vanished and the commander followed him as they moved towards the second floor. Itachi's body was tense as they searched the rooms carefully. He wasn't sure what had wiped out the lesser members of their enemies, and the thought that it might not be friendly to them was an even bigger concern. "Do you hear that?" The raven froze and strained his ears for the noise the commander heard. It sounded like muffled singing. They exchanged glances as they crept forward towards the room where the noise was coming from and cautiously opened the door. Next to him, the commander's gun dropped to the floor in shock and Itachi nearly collapsed on his knees with relief. Naruto? The small blonde was sitting on a chair, swinging his legs back and forth. Headphones covered his ears and he was singing off-key to the sound while he cuddled something on his lap. As much as Itachi wanted to grab Naruto, he still entered carefully, and once the room was deemed clear, he circled around to come in front of Naruto. He jumped at the sudden appearance but pulled off the headphones and launched himself into Itachi's arms. Loud music blared from the large headphones and he watched as Naruto reached up to pull out small earplugs from his ears. "Itachi, is this part of your training? Why are you in here, Naruto?" Itachi asked as he pulled the child into an embrace. "Well, I was downstairs blindfolded, but there were a lot of people shouting after they tied me up, and then someone picked me up and put me in here." A large smile graced his face. "Then they pulled the blindfold off and my mommy was there. She gave me this." A stuffed fox was thrust into Itachi's stunned face. "Your mom?" "Yup. She gave him to me and then said that her and daddy miss me a lot and to be good. After that she told me to put those earplugs in before she put the headphones on. I couldn't hear anything once she put them on." Itachi frowned and gestured the commander into the room. He came in with a large blanket and several bags, while his eyes slid over the room with a trained eye. The items were set on the chair before he turned around and faced a corner, allowing Itachi to handle the next part. "Naruto, you're going to have to change so we can check your clothes for bugs," he said carefully. "And we're going to have to keep your fox for a little while too." Tears formed in the blonde's eyes and he gripped the stuffed animal tighter. "But my mommy gave him to me. You'll get him back, but only if you listen to me." Frowning, Naruto handed Itachi the stuffed fox, who sealed it inside a bag, before proceeding to change out of his clothes. The raven held up the blanket for him, looking away as Naruto finished changing and then wrapped him up in the thick material. He picked him up and moved towards the door while the commander followed him, keeping a close watch on the extra hallways. The reports had already come back clear, but it never hurt to be safe. Itachi paused at the stairs and he felt Naruto turn his head around. He quickly caught him and pulled the blanket over his head. "Naruto, keep your eyes closed until I say so. If you peek, you won't get your fox back." Naruto nodded and pressed his head into Itachi's neck while they moved through the bloody area. They were ushered into the van as soon as they passed through the front doors, and Itachi pulled the blanket off the child's head. Bright eyes blinked up at him. "I didn't peek, Itachi, I promise." The raven settled the child on his lap, pulling him closer as he buried his nose in the blonde locks. "I know, Naruto." When they came back, Naruto was instantly checked over by not only the doctor but also a highly distressed Makoto. When he emerged from the examining room, his tan skin was red from the doctor's scrubbing at it and tears tracked down his face. In an instant, the female was at his side, trying to reassure him while she threw a harsh glare at the doctors. Itachi smirked as they cowered away from the look and moved forward to take the little blonde, but was stopped by his mother. "I'm sorry, Itachi, but your father wanted to talk to him first. Anything you want to know will be in a file. You'll have to wait to ask him anything in case his mentality isn't set yet." Itachi opened his mouth to protest but realized that it was probably best this way. He watched as Makoto led Naruto away, allowing the blonde to complain about the mean doctors who were too harsh with their treatments. Inside the large room, Naruto stood patiently before the heavily covered desk as Fugaku read over everything that Itachi had written down. Makoto had already left at the blonde's request, despite her offering to stay with him and make it easier. The papers were set down and dark eyes settled on him, making him stare back. Fugaku rubbed at his temples. "I'm not going to ask what happened at that warehouse since Itachi wouldn't lie. So why don't you tell me what you know, Naruto? I want to be trained in the arts of combat. In the arts that my parents undertook," he answered evenly. Silence settled in the room before Fugaku spoke again, trying to convince the blonde otherwise. "Naruto, are you sure this is what you want to do? You're only 10 and still young by all standards." "I'm sure." "So, you know what they did?" Naruto nodded. "Those memories don't die as easily as people think they do, and I think you know what I'm going to ask next." The elder Uchiha chuckled. "If that is your wish, then I won't stop you from it. I'll offer you the best training I have. The best tutors and trainers under my command will be at your disposal. Although I'm curious to see how you'll tell Itachi and Sasuke about this. I'll tell them myself when the time is right, but I don't want them to know now. I've watched them before and they enjoy the fact that they can protect me. I don't want to ruin that for them." Fugaku pressed his fingers together. "If you change your mind at any time during your training, you can back out. We won't hold it against you, nor will we think any less of you for doing so." Naruto's eyes narrowed in determination. "I won't back out. I'm going to protect them at all costs." He paused. "I also believe that you have a book of mine." "I do," he answered. His hand dropped to a book on the desk before he passed the worn leather into Naruto's waiting hands. The blonde flipped through it carefully and then tucked it against his side. Fugaku watched as the child turned around and exited the room without another word, and he felt something tug at him. It was the same feeling he felt when Itachi and Sasuke were old enough to start training. The times that they first learned the art of killing and their hands were stained forever. It was the feeling of tainted innocence and lost childhood, one that he had hoped to keep Naruto away from. He wasn't sure if he would have undergone training with his own parents had things worked out different in the past, but there was no sense in thinking about that now. For now, it was best to think ahead, where the future was never set in stone, unlike the past. Itachi sat in the plush leather chair combing over the small stuffed fox. It had passed clear of all bugs compared to the clothes, and they had no right to keep it. He was pulled from the taxing test as another cackle escaped Sasuke's throat. "Nehihiha. No, keep trying." Sasuke growled and tried to clear his throat again so he could reach a deeper pitch. This time, the laughter came out darker for a second before it pitched into a higher tone, making Sasuke squeak. He instantly slapped a hand over his mouth at the noise while Obito turned his head to the side to hide his smile. Muffled laughter came from the side of the room as Naruto gasped for breath against the wall. Red color bloomed into Sasuke's cheeks as even Itachi chuckled and the younger Raven stormed over to Naruto's side. However, when he spoke, his voice was raspy from too much use and he croaked badly, making the blonde burst into more laughter. When he finally calmed down and wiped the tears from his eyes, he looked Sasuke over. "What were you doing?" "Practicing my evil laugh," Sasuke stated. "Every great evil overlord has one." Naruto cocked an eyebrow. "Well, even though it's a stress reliever, I would never do it. If you get too occupied with it, you'll miss something develop and people will take advantage of it." Sasuke scowled. "Where do you get an idea like that?" I just heard it around, he said. But if you want, I'll practice with you. Runt, Obito called out, scooping the small blonde into his arms. I heard that you were rather popular today, are you alright? Itachi picked up a coaster on the table and chunked it at his cousin's head. Idiot, why would you ask him something like that? The older Uchiha tweaked Naruto's nose, making him giggle. Because it happened, and acting as though it isn't going to make him forget. I just want to make sure he's fine. It's okay, Itachi, the blonde chirped, popping his head over Obito's shoulder. They didn't do anything to me except tie me to a chair and ordered their minions to shoot when you guys came through the door. I was worried cause I didn't want anyone hurt. They had people up in the vents, waiting for a good shot. The vents were destroyed when we arrived. Naruto nodded. Of course, Daddy blew them up. Any good evil overlord knows that your vents need to be small so no one can get in them. The two elder Uchihas were silent, and Obito set the child on the ground so he could scamper over to Sasuke's side. Obito drifted over to Itachi and watched as Naruto tried to help position Sasuke's face so it looked more demanding and fierce, but only proceeded to make him look annoyed. They both were silent as they mulled over their thoughts, knowing that this would somehow drift back to their father and it could no longer be overlooked. Naruto was no longer innocent to the deeds going on in the mansion. Heaving a large sigh, Obito walked over to the two young children. Right, Sasuke, let's try that laugh again. Itachi groaned and stood up from his chair. He wasn't going to get any work if he had to listen to two young children trying to work on a laugh. He knew that Sasuke and Obito were using this as a way to distract Naruto from the incident that afternoon, hoping that if his mind was occupied, it would keep the ordeal at bay. They would be watching him carefully and every shred of information would be used to track down the Akatsuki, but the blonde was their main concern right now. He moved into the study and glanced at the fox again. His eyes narrowed as something shinned in the light and he plucked at it carefully, bringing it under the small lamp on the desk once it was free. He stared down at the long strand of red hair and he searched for any signs of a hair tag. Standing up, he swept out of the room and down towards a lab where he handed the hair to a technician. Tell me who this belongs to. The female nodded and started to work quickly while Itachi waited outside. If the hair belonged to an Akatsuki member, then it would show who gave the fox to Naruto. Itachi wasn't sure what the blonde meant when he said he saw his mother, since the woman was dead. Perhaps he had seen someone who looked like her and in the stressed state. His mind connected it with his mom. His own mother had suggested that perhaps the child was referring to something spiritual that protected him, but there were a number of possibilities. 30 minutes later, the door opened again and Itachi found himself staring down at the piece of paper in disbelief. DNA tests on hair were rarely wrong, and if that was the case then this paper was telling the truth. Naruto's parents were still alive. It was late as Itachi stared at the darkened ceiling. His mind was spinning around at the new discovery, and although he considered all possible theories of the hair being planted there, nothing worked out. If it hadn't been Kushina that Naruto had seen, then the person had gone through every effort to assure that the child was well protected. The earplugs and headphones kept him from hearing the gunshots, and the windowless room made it impossible to see the bodies. But the detail and care that were orchestrated couldn't have come from a random person. It was something that a parent would do for their child, and it further helped to solidify Itachi's theory that it had indeed been Kushina in that room. No doubt, they were waiting for the rescue team to arrive and drive away safely before even thinking about leaving. But he couldn't figure out why they didn't take Naruto with him then. Not that he was complaining, as he had grown rather attached to him, but Naruto was their son. Speaking of Naruto, he wondered where the blonde was. It was storming outside as the delayed storm had finally moved over the rest of the city, hitting the suburbs. By now, the child was usually in his room, asking to stay with him. Itachi climbed out of bed and moved down the hallway carefully. He hesitated at Naruto's door before poking his head inside the messy room, searching for any signs of the blonde. His eyes settled on the large mass of blankets on the bed that jumped as another crack of thunder sounded across the sky. Moving across the room, he knelt next to the bed and called the child's name. It was silent until another bolt of lighting lit up the room and he was tackled to the ground by a shaking blonde. Wide blue eyes stared up at him and he ushered Naruto down the hallway towards his room. As soon as they entered the room, Naruto bolted for the bed, diving under the covers. Itachi followed him silently and slipped in next to him, feeling the trembling body press up against his. Instinctively, he wrapped his arms around the blonde's waist, assuring him that he was there, and eventually the shaking died down, giving way to peaceful sleep. He felt Naruto snuggle closer and Itachi sighed at the innocent nature. There was no way that something so small and young could be so dangerous, let alone an evil genius. But looking at it from all sides, he was slowly being forced to admit that there was something about Naruto that was starting to make him think otherwise. Loud gunshots echoed throughout the shooting range and Itachi blinked as one shooter in particular let a bullet fly loose. On a television screen, he watched as the target exploded as the bullet raced through it and embedded itself into a tree. The target was too far from the range to track the shot, so viewing screens had been installed out in the field to help determine when it had been hit. Itachi leaned over the ledge of the window and watched as the person brought binoculars to his eyes to check the shot for himself. The shooter sat up as another male entered the viewing area and started to talk. Itachi couldn't hear the words being exchanged, but he had gotten extremely good at reading lips and his eyes followed along with the conversation with a slight frown. Behind him, the door opened and closed before a presence came to stand next to him. "What's wrong, Itachi? I don't like it." Fugaku chuckled. "So I've heard, but it was Naruto's choice to undertake this training. He has the option to back out anytime he wishes." Itachi scowled. "But he's only 15, don't you think that's too young for him to be training with the older and elite members? Why couldn't he stay with a younger group? Because he wouldn't progress more. His skills put him up with that of the older group and it wouldn't be fair to him to keep holding him back. You wouldn't like it if I held you back because Sasuke wasn't up to par with your skill." He was silent as his father looked out the window and down at the teen who was adjusting the scope on his weapon. The head of the sniper training was an older male named Iruka and he was excellent at training Naruto. He had limitless patience along with a firm hand in discipline that made him the best mentor for the blonde. Fugaku placed a hand on Itachi's shoulder. "He'll be fine, Itachi, it's in his blood and as long as it's something he wants to do, he'll succeed. Don't deny him his desires." He let his hand slip away and turned to go. He paused at the door. "Don't forget that you have a meeting with the commanders today." Itachi nodded and leaned against the walls as Iruka corrected another person and Naruto waited for the okay to fire. He was sprawled out on the grass, covered in camouflage, making it hard for Itachi to make out his body. A black bandana was wrapped around his hair to keep it from being seen and if the teen turned a little more, Itachi would have been able to make out the dirt on his face. The call to set echoed around the range and he watched as everyone released a bullet. The viewer was keyed in on Naruto's target and once again, it exploded. It took the blonde a second to dial in the image with his view, but he grinned in delight at the destroyed target. "Time for a break while I hand out the mission reports for this next exercise," Iruka called out. The snipers moved away from their equipment as they shrugged out of their coverings. Itachi's eyes narrowed as the man pulled Naruto aside and handed him a piece of paper. "Since you just joined, I'm keeping you here for a little more training." Itachi watched as Naruto nodded and he could see the disappointment in his eyes at not being able to head out with the elite team. Itachi however sighed with relief as he continued to listen. He knew that Naruto would be staying in training for at least another 2 hours before he went to work, another issue that he had argued with his father about. Naruto darted off into the woods and quickly vanished from his sight, leaving Itachi to wait until he showed up on a viewer. They had monitors out in the forest to keep track of all their snipers when they practiced in case something happened to them. The viewing monitors doubled as a security camera as well, since the area was too vast to keep fully guarded. Finally, the blonde showed up on the screen as he slunk through the terrain. Itachi wasn't sure what his target was this time, but he was covered in camouflage making it harder to keep track of him. Finally, he settled down in a spot and set up his equipment before ducking under a bush. The door opened and Itachi's eyes glanced towards it before going back to the screen. "Hello, Iruka." "Itachi," the man said, inclining his head slightly. "What brings you here again, watching Naruto?" He nodded. "I think he's too young and I feel as though he's growing up too fast." Iruka sat on the table as his eyes focused on the viewer. "Naruto is young, but I've seen younger men and women pick up a gun before his age. We didn't start training him with a gun until a few years ago. We went in stages, so his mind was prepared for each level. He learns it all so fast. He's losing his childhood and innocence. No one stays innocent forever, Itachi," Iruka said carefully. "It was bound to happen sooner or later, the question would have been when. I know you care for him, but you can't protect him forever. Get out. Iruka dipped his head again. I'm sorry if I offended you, but it's the truth. Before Itachi could snap at the man again, he vanished from the room, leaving him alone. Silence filled the area and Itachi soaked it in, trying to remind himself that this was Naruto's idea to join the team and he had no right to deny it to him. But it still didn't quell the fear that rose up in him, and the feelings confused him. The year Naruto was kidnapped, his father pulled the blonde from the school with the excuse that he didn't want a repeat of that day again. It made sense and Naruto stayed at home, being schooled by various tutors. Sasuke sulked and pouted at losing his younger brother and asked to stay home as well, but Makoto had quite literally kicked him out the door. Itachi hadn't suspected anything for the first few months, but when Naruto turned 11, he began noticing the differences. The once smooth hands became rough and calloused and his actions grew more silent. Itachi had to strain his ears to hear Naruto walking down the hallway, and one of the bigger changes he had undergone was his attire. The once normal clothes had changed into bright colors. The sudden change had thrown Itachi for a while, making him think that perhaps his thoughts about Naruto training were wrong. Because if he had been training, he wouldn't be wearing something that could be seen across the mansion. However, he indulged himself and asked the blonde why he had suddenly changed his wardrobe. Naruto simply answered, "It throws off my enemies and makes them confused. Plus, if I can hide in plain sight with bright clothes, then imagine what I can do with normal ones." That next day, Itachi skipped classes to spy on Naruto. His mind told him that Naruto was training to become something dangerous and he didn't like it, but what he didn't like was that no one was telling him anything. If someone was training him, Itachi wanted to know what he was being trained for and by whom. Years back, he had made a promise to protect the child. This also fell under the same subject of protecting him. He wasn't surprised to see Naruto wandering the hallways at that time in the morning, nor was he surprised when he turned down the hall that led to the practice rooms. He was, however, shocked to see Naruto settle in for a training session with one of their many teachers. Together, they warmed up with simple exercises to help loosen up their muscles before they started to attack each other. Their movements were fluid with each blow and block that was thrown, allowing them to move carefully around each other. It didn't take long for Itachi to realize that the movements weren't focusing on the force behind the attacks, but rather the tactical advantage in a battle. Due to Naruto's age, he wasn't strong enough to take down a fully armed man, so he would have to find other ways to protect himself. They broke apart after the teacher pinned Naruto to the ground and Itachi had to stop from going in to pull the man off him. Once the teacher vanished from the room, Naruto sat down on the blue mat, closed his eyes and started to meditate. For a while, Itachi watched him, trying to decide if he should confront him or not. In the end, Naruto simply opened an eye. "I know you're there, Itachi, come and join me." The words were spoken softly and without delay. Itachi walked inside the room and sat beside Naruto, mimicking Naruto's stance. For a while, they sat in silence, neither asking the questions on their mind. Finally, Naruto let his shoulders slump. "Why are you here?" "Because you were acting different. It's my job to watch for those things." Naruto nodded. "That's right, if anything is out of place then it could be a cause for concern." Itachi turned around until he was facing Naruto, gazing into his blue eyes. "Naruto, what are you trying to do? I wanted to keep this from you and Sasuke for a little longer, but I guess I underestimated you," Naruto said softly and his head tipped back to look up at the ceiling. "I'm in training to become a sniper, like my parents." Before Naruto could blink, he was pressed flat against the mat, staring up into the furious face of Itachi. He flinched at the hard glare that was directed his way. "You want to do what?" "I have my reasons why and you can't stop me, Itachi," he snapped. "I'm not a child anymore." Itachi's head lowered against the mat to rest next to Naruto's. "Please Naruto, don't do this. I can't stand to see you hurt." A small smile crossed Naruto's face. "Thank you, Itachi, but this is something that I had to do. My reasons are mine alone, but I beg you to trust me." The plea was there and Itachi felt torn between telling Naruto to stop and letting him continue. He knew what it was like, wanting to prove yourself to others, and he imagined that it couldn't be easy for Naruto. Being surrounded by skilled and trained fighters every day merely to be the only one who had never touched a weapon before was something that probably made Naruto feel weak. He shifted until he could wrap his arms around the younger boy, pulling him into a tight embrace. "I trust you, Naruto. I won't like that you're doing this, but I'll trust you. Naruto nodded against his shoulder, wrapping smaller arms around Itachi's torso. Don't tell Sasuke, let him figure things out first, he said, voice slightly muffled in Itachi's shirt. He heard Itachi agree with his demands before a soft kiss was placed on his forehead. Stay safe, Naruto, Itachi murmured as he stood up and left the room silently. After that day, Itachi continued his training while Naruto started his new duties. He watched from a distance, noting the way he seemed to handle everything that was thrown at him. It was easy to forget that Itachi had started at a young age as well, and oftentimes he had to stop himself from running into a training session. Dark eyes blinked in surprise. Even though Naruto had said the same words 2 weeks earlier, it was still unexpected to hear them. Naruto's eyes held his, judging him for any reaction towards his words. For several moments, silence filled the space between them before Naruto stalked past him, eyes swimming with unshed tears. I hate myself for feeling this way. The words were softly spoken as he passed by Itachi, and without another thought, Itachi's hand shot out, grabbing Naruto's shoulder. He spun him around and flinched at the raw emotion. It had been a while since he had seen emotions on Naruto's face, and it reminded Itachi how young the blonde was. Naruto wasn't used to hiding his feelings at all times, and Itachi could see the mask falling down around him. His cupped Naruto's face gently as his eyes searched the hurt face. Naruto froze under his touch, and Itachi's fingers brushed over the scarred cheeks. He could see the hesitation and hurt swimming in the blue eyes, and he slowly pulled Naruto into an embrace. Hesitantly, Naruto's arms circled around Itachi's waist, and within seconds, his body was trembling. Itachi slowly guided them towards the ground until they were kneeling in the sand, allowing the grainy material to slip inside his clothes. Naruto's hands clawed at his back as Itachi's hands found themselves buried in the blonde locks as he pushed Naruto's head closer. Small spots of wetness started to appear on his shirt, and he flinched as the cold drops started to seep into the fabric. The feeling was opposite of the warm drops that covered his chest. I'm sorry, Naruto, he murmured, stroking the damp hair. He leaned forward more, curling his body around Naruto's, protecting him from the rain. I never meant to hurt you like this, you mean so much to me. Naruto shook his head and tried to push away, but Itachi's arms tightened more around him. Don't say that, Itachi, he sobbed. Don't say things you don't mean. Naruto? No, he muttered, pulling away. Tears mixed in with the rain, making it hard to differentiate the two. I know you don't mean it. You show more than you think, and I'm tired of feeling this way. I don't want to feel anymore, it hurts too much. Itachi's hands gripped Naruto's shoulders tightly, his eyes flashing. You will not hide your emotions away. I will not let you turn into an Uchiha. His grip softened and he reached up to brush away the wetness streaming down Naruto's face. You have no idea how much it would hurt me to see you lock away your emotions. Why? Naruto asked wearily. His body slumped forward, mentally exhausted from the earlier breakdown. You only see me like another brother. Shouldn't you want another perfect Uchiha brother? No, I just want you. I want all of you, and you have no idea how much I've wanted it. Itachi answered, tipping Naruto's head back. He placed a soft kiss on his forehead and dragged him closer to his wet body. Tachi? He mumbled sleepily. Blue eyes struggled to stay open, and the warmth from Itachi's body was making him tired. Weeks of training and emotional stress were quickly catching up, and Naruto found his head dropping forward. He felt Itachi's hands guiding his head closer towards his chest, blocking it from the rain before darkness overtook him. Warmth surrounded Naruto as he blearily opened his eyes. A white ceiling stared back at him, and he closed his eyes again, feeling his head pulse with pain. As the pain in between his eyes increased, he turned towards the side, facing the window. Darkness filled the glass, and he flinched as a lightning bolt flew across the sky. He wasn't sure how he had gotten to his room, but he was grateful for the soft bed beneath him. His body ached from the training, and his headache was growing worse with each lightning bolt. He jumped as a loud clap of thunder shook the window and lighting lit up his room. Sitting up, he let the covers pull around his waist and rubbed at his face. He wanted to go curl up in Itachi's room again, to feel safe in Itachi's arms, but he wasn't about to crawl back to him. There was no way Naruto would be able to face Itachi again after his breakdown outside. Heat raced to his cheeks as he remembered crying into Itachi's chest and telling him how he felt. There was no way he could ever face him again. Warm arms circled around his chest, making him jump slightly. "You're letting in the cold air," a voice mumbled, and tugged him back down to the bed. Covers were thrown over his body before a heavy arm settled across his waist. Naruto turned around in the grasp and found dark eyes watching him. "Itachi." The arm tightened as he tried to back out of the bed and he finally gave up with a huff. "Why are you here?" "Because I don't want to push you away anymore, I want you by my side." Naruto blinked and ducked his head into the sheets. "You're just saying that." Itachi's fingers curled around his chin, pulling his head up slightly until their eyes could meet. "No, I'm not. I know that you want me to say that I love you, Naruto, but I can't do that yet. I won't lie and say that I don't have feelings for you, but I'm not free to pursue them." "Why?" A chuckle escaped Itachi's throat. "Because for one, you're still young and what you think you're feeling can change in a few years." He placed a finger over Naruto's lips to stop him from protesting. "And the other reason is that I want you to focus on your training. I know it's important to you, and you won't be able to think straight if you're always thinking about other things." Naruto's head nodded, if not reluctantly at the statement. He knew all too well what the next few years would entail from him. The stress that would be placed on both of them as the recent lord moved into retirement would be high and several plans would need to be put into play. And because of this, something as trivial as a relationship would only make things harder. However, it didn't mean that they wouldn't try. But they both needed to mature before they could try anything more, and for now Naruto was content. Itachi had reminded him that he had a job that he needed to do, and playing kissy face with Itachi wasn't going to help any. "I understand," he said softly. Itachi sighed and pressed a gentle kiss to his forehead. "Things will work out eventually, Naruto," he said, tucking the blonde head under his chin. "I promise." Naruto nodded and waited until he felt Itachi's breathing even out before closing his eyes. He bit his lip and fought back the lone tear that threatened to escape his eye. Things weren't going to work out. Thunder rolled over the dark clouds while rain pounded into the drenched earth. It was hard to see anything through the heavy rain, and it only made the day seem darker than it really was. Above, a large bolt of lightning forked across the sky before vanishing, taking with it the light that it had brought. The softest sound of fabric shifting was heard in between the raindrops as the water hit the tops of umbrellas. Water dripped from the edges of the black umbrellas, falling onto the green grass below. Not a word was spoken though of the cold rain that splashed down from the sky or of the mud that was staining once polished shoes. Instead, dark eyes were focused on the large hole that had opened up to the darkened clouds. A lone figure stood in front of the open hole that was slowly being filled, not caring that the rain was soaking through the black material of his clothes or that hair was plastered against pale skin. White flowers covered the top of polished casket as it was lowered into the ground and pale fingers gripped the stem of his flower tighter. The rain provided the perfect chance to cry. No one would be able to tell apart the tears from the raindrops apart. Clenching his teeth together, the figure tossed the last flower into the hole, watching as it landed on the others. His hands fell to his side as the casket hit the bottom of the hole, settling with a soft, muffled thump. Quietly, the opening was filled with fresh dirt. It spread across the flower-covered surface lightly, trickling down the sides and filling up the empty space until the casket was covered. And Itachi watched it all with dull eyes, wondering where everything had gone wrong. The small metal shaker was tossed into the air and caught behind the clothed back. Giving the shaker a small twirl on long fingers, the object was set on the wooden surface as another bottle of alcohol was spun around in the air. Catching it, and pouring a small amount into the shaker, the bottle was exchanged for another. Spinning around and rolling the shaker along his arm, Naruto slid along the floor until he reached the waiting glasses. Winking at the waiting girls, he opened the metal shaker and poured out the mixed drink, tossing in fruit as he finished. The girls giggled behind their hands and slid a bill across the bar before leaving. Naruto smirked as they swayed away and bobbed his head to the music as he walked back to his station. The music pulsed loudly in the club and he watched from the corner of his eye as the crowd swayed back and forth. He pushed his dark brown bangs away from his face as he dropped the dirty glasses into a bucket of water before his eyes flickered towards the back of the bar. Even in the dim lighting, he could make out the tables that lined the walls and his eyes focused on a dark-haired male who was in deep conversation with another male. He dropped his gaze before they felt the weight of his stare and he went back to wiping the bar down, brushing his hand by his ear before it fell to the counter again. Bane. Naruto looked up as his fake name was called out and he nodded towards the person. You on shift right now? Another positive nod and the caller gave a quick dip of his head, signaling him that the line was open. This will be the only time that you'll be able to get in. Our membership is limited enough as is, you should consider it an honor that we're considering you at all, a soft voice spoke. I am honored, but the date is inconvenient for me. I have other shipments coming in on that date and I don't trust anyone else to handle them. Surely there must be another date that I can come meet the rest of the members? Orochimaru, Akatsuki doesn't take this matter lightly. Allowing new members into our organization is very rare. You'll either find a way to make yourself free on that date, or we'll give the offer to someone else. Either the 21st or nothing, take your pick, the voice hissed. Sighing, the dark-haired male nodded. I'll switch my schedule around, have someone else pick up the order and be there on the 21st. Thank you for listening to my request either way. The other male didn't say anything but nodded briefly before standing up. He set a stack of bills on the table and swept out of the club, leaving Orochimaru alone at the table. Naruto's eyes flickered over towards him before they glanced at the door, where the other male had vanished. He scanned the club floor, checking for any of Akatsuki's bodyguards. No doubt they would have left once their boss had, but he wasn't about to take any chances. The quick scan showed that they were gone and Naruto stood back up, brushing his hand past his ear one last time. The signal was cut and his shoulders relaxed only slightly while his mind raced around. Moving towards the end of the bar to serve another guest, he waited for his boss to catch his eye before turning his attention back to his job. The drop date had been confirmed and needed to be relayed back as quickly as possible. Naruto couldn't leave the club for another 2 hours in case leaving early would draw any suspicion, but it would give his team plenty of time to start preparing. Bane, a quick word please, his boss called out and Naruto slipped away quickly. He followed his boss into the secured room and waited until the door was shut before the question was asked. Where do we stand? Naruto's eyebrows furrowed. The drop date is on the 21st. It'll be the best time to get in and take them out. I'm certain that they won't have all their members there, only the underlings, but some will be better than none. We can't wait any longer, it might be years before they let someone else in. But the 21st is in a week. We can work with that, we've worked with shorter amounts of time before. There were rumors that this was happening and we've already lined up equipment. All we needed was a date. Dark eyes looked up at Naruto. And the boss? Naruto stiffened. Which one? The one that doesn't know. Naruto's head dropped and he avoided the look. A second later, he looked back up, face calm and composed. It'll work out, I know it will. This will benefit us all in the long run anyway. He frowned for a second and propped his hip on the edge of the desk. You're going to fire me today. What? If I sudden don't show up to work anymore after that day, it'll draw suspicion. You know what we're planning and every base has to be covered for this to work. All loose ends must be tied up. Naruto stated, his voice firm. I'll set everything up for you, just don't miss the cue and make sure it's public. After the boss nodded his head, Naruto spun around on his heel and left the room, his mind racing. He knew what he had to do and his heart weighed heavily with his decision. Heaving a sigh, he pushed the feeling away as he entered the bar again, schooling his face into a calm mask. His eyes quickly scanned the floor for his victim and he grinned when he saw the two females dancing on the floor. He glided across the floor, slipping behind one of them with a leer. You know love, my boss isn't looking right now, he muttered, hands trailing over her body. And I could really use some relaxation. Your hands all over me, rubbing out the knots. The female turned around, eyes flashing at him. Bane, stop it, she cried out, pushing him away. You can't keep this up. Naruto's hip bumped the table behind him, rattling the long neck sitting on its surface. Cold eyes shot a glare at him, but Naruto just snorted with laughter. He reached around and snatched one of the drinks, holding it up to her in a toast. What's wrong, baby? You sure weren't screaming that last night. With an enraged scream, the dancer took a swing at him, catching Naruto in the jaw. He grunted at the impact and toppled onto the ground. The lights above him swam and it took a few blinks before everything came into focus. When it did, the shadowed figure of his boss came into view and he gripped the neck of the beer tighter. Hey boss. A sigh escaped the older man's mouth. Bane, this is the third time this week I've caught you messing around and disturbing the guests. Naruto scoffed. So? It's not like you can fire me or anything. No, that's exactly what I'm going to do. This childish attitude of yours has finally broken my patience. Now, leave quietly or I'll have to call security. Faye, like your security can do anything to me. Within minutes, Naruto found himself being tossed outside harshly by the bouncer at the front door. His fingers curled around the beer bottle again as he struggled to get into a sitting position. He brought up his hand and wiped at his mouth, brushing away a small trickle of blood. He had forgotten how hard Sakura could punch. She had put a lot of force into that throw. Getting up slowly, Naruto dusted himself off and limped towards the waiting car. He winced as he climbed in and started the engine, pulling away from the club for the last time. The beer bottle rested carefully in the cup holder, leftover liquid still sloshing around whenever he made a turn. Easing up on the gas once he left the city, his eyes flickered to the rearview mirror again. He knew that he wasn't being tailed. No one had any reason to after all, but it was something that had been deeply embedded into him during training. He sighed as he crossed the bridge that led away from the city, the buildings quickly vanishing into the background. They had left nothing uncovered for this job, knowing the risk that it ran, and Naruto had spared no expense at his disguise. Pulling onto a dirt road, Naruto turned down a long gravel road, listening to the gravel hit the underside of his car. Years ago when they first started him working at the club, they had tracked down a man that he would be able to mimic. They copied everything about him and now it was time to let the disguise go. Parking the car, Naruto strode into the small shack. His nose curled at the smell of marijuana that seemed to wrap around the house and he turned cold eyes onto the lone figure in the corner. "Are you enjoying yourself, Bane?" he asked. The man's head lolled on his shoulders and hazy eyes tried to focus on him. "Dude, you're that imaginary guy that comes and takes my car every night so I can't get to work." He paused. "You look like me too." Naruto nodded. "You were fired today," he stated, tossing the keys onto the table. "Stay home for a week before going back into town." "Whatever you say, other me," he snorted with laughter. Rolling his eyes, Naruto left the house and stalked through the backyard. A small fence separated him from the woods and it only took a small jump before he found himself walking through the crowded trees. It was quiet, all the birds asleep as he continued walking through the wooded area. A soft chirping sound made him stop and he chirped back at a lower pitch. Two more soft chirps sounded before a lone figure stepped out from the trees. "He's not going to be happy seeing you with that bruise on your face." Naruto frowned. "He'll live." Dark eyes glanced towards him. "Naruto, about this plan." He stopped him, holding up a hand and grabbing a helmet with the other. "Don't, Sasuke. I don't need you arguing with me on this too." Sasuke frowned but didn't say a word as he slipped the helmet on once they reached paved road again. They silently climbed onto the bike and he sighed as Naruto tightened his arms around his waist, a silent command to go. It wouldn't take a long time to get back to the mansion, but it was long enough for Sasuke to think about how everything was going to fall apart soon. Naruto moved silently down the hallway, listening for any noises that might stop him. There weren't any, due to the late night, but he didn't want to take any chances. If the right person found out about this plan, years of planning would go down the drain. He entered a large room, noting that his team was already seated around the large table. He nodded to them and they nodded back. It was time to get to work. "All right," he started, moving to the head of the table. "The date has been confirmed for the 21st of this month. All plans that have been made will now go into effect. I need confirmation from everyone on this team that they are willing to go through with this plan in its entirety." Cold silence settled around the room at the calmly spoken words. They were spoken with deadly calm, leaving no room for argument should someone try to back out at the last minute. But the question wasn't needed, for everyone at the table was committed to the blonde, no questions asked. Seeing the determined faces on everyone around the table, Naruto allowed himself a small smile and bowed his head in thanks. His eyes closed briefly, allowing the slight moment of peace to rush over him, knowing that once he left the room tonight, peace would be gone. Blue eyes opened and a fierce determination glinted in them as he placed his hands on the table's surface. "This is what we're going to do," he said, looking around. "We're going to take that building and destroy everything they have in it, crippling the Akatsuki for years to come. I'm going to need all small bombs that we have ready to move to the site in no more than 2 days. Snipers, we've already scouted the building and those around it. Keep to the stations that you've picked and remember that we're covering multiple spots. All members who agreed to the infiltration group will need to be equipped properly so that they can get out before the bombs are detonated. My plan is that we work from the bottom up, so we'll be making the escape from the roof. Snipers on nearby roofs will give you cover and help you escape safely. Naruto shivered as adrenaline started to race through his body and he could feel the tension in the room growing as the plans were laid out. They had practiced and planned for months, but now that they had the final information, it was more than just sitting around and planning, it was time to go. "Any questions?" he asked. For a few seconds it was quiet before a hand near the back slowly rose. What about Itachi?" The room grew deathly silent, knowing that the soon-to-be overlord had no idea what they were plotting. And that despite the years that had passed, he still held feelings for the young blonde, who returned them equally. A beer bottle was set on the table's surface with a soft clink and Naruto smiled, even though everyone could see that it was forced. "That part will be taken care of," he stated and then slipped the bottle back into a plastic baggie. "We'll meet again tomorrow night, get some sleep and then start preparing." Everyone nodded and murmured a good night to him. Without another word, Naruto swept out of the room. It was already late in the night, nearing 1 in the morning, and he needed to get to bed before Itachi suspected anything. A pang of guilt stabbed at Naruto, and he winced slightly at the feeling. He always felt bad for going behind Itachi's back like this, but he was convinced that it was for the best. If things worked out the way they were supposed to, then Itachi would never have to know and he would be protected for years to come. And that alone helped to ease the pain, if only a little. His feet slowed down as he approached Itachi's room. It was silent in the room, from what he could hear through the thick door. When Naruto had turned 18, Itachi had dismissed his current love interest in favor of courting Naruto and since then, focused his attention on him. Pushing the door open, Naruto slipped inside quietly, not wanting to wake Itachi up. Usually the older male would try to stay up until he came back home, but at times, sleep would pull at him too heavily. The body on the bed shifted as he crawled underneath the covers and a dark eye opened at the motion. It softened once it realized who it was and warm arms circled around his waist, drawing him closer. Naruto sighed into the embrace and allowed Itachi to bury his nose into his damp hair. It had become habit for him to shower as soon as he came home, not liking the smell of smoke. The smell made it harder to detect any changes in the area around him and Naruto disliked it when something affected his senses. A soft kiss was pressed to his temple while legs wrapped around his own. Despite the year that had passed since Itachi had started courting him, the older male had been patient, never forcing anything and allowing Naruto to move at a pace comfortable to him. And now at 19, Naruto was grateful for the experience that Itachi had. The older male knew when he wanted to be held and kissed gently, or when he just wanted to give in to his teenage hormones. Never once had Itachi taken advantage of him, and for that, Naruto found that his respect grew for Itachi. He would make a great leader when it was time for him to step up. Silence settled over the room as Itachi fell back asleep and Naruto felt his own eyes slowly drifting shut. It had been a long day and the next few days would only be longer. Sighing, Naruto allowed sleep to take over his body, curling up next to Itachi. When he woke up a few hours later, it was to a soft feeling tracing something over his face. His eyes quickly snapped open and he went to grab at the person, only to have his wrist caught. He relaxed as his gaze settled on Itachi's face and mumbled a soft good morning. "What happened?" Itachi asked, tracing over the bruise on his cheek. Naruto shook his head. "Just a small fight at the bar. Look what I got for you." Itachi blinked as a brown bottle was waved in front of his face. He wasn't sure what it was and took it hesitantly. "A beer bottle. It belongs to Orochimaru," Naruto said and watched as the gears started to turn in Itachi's mind. "His fingerprints will be on the sides of it and we'll be able to get inside his warehouse with them. He's getting a shipment in on the 21st. Itachi hummed and set the bottle on the table before drawing Naruto close for a kiss. He trailed his lips down the side of the tanned neck, listening to the soft noises that escaped Naruto's mouth. He paused slightly before reaching for Naruto's right arm, pulling his wrist to his lips. Naruto groaned softly at the motions over the raised skin on the inside of wrist and his body shivered at the treatment. "Itachi, when are you going to tell me what the numbers mean?" Itachi asked, pulling back. He gazed down at the barcode tattoo on the inside of Naruto's wrist. 2 years ago, when Naruto was 17, he came back with his wrist bandaged and it took a month for Itachi to find out what was underneath the coverings. The numbers underneath the lines was personal and unique, since most barcodes had 10 numbers along with dashes. Naruto's, though, only had 8 and Itachi was always curious about the meaning. 48224469, Itachi murmured, reading the numbers aloud. He knew it was a simple code, but he found that he couldn't decode the damn thing. Soon, Naruto answered, pulling his arm back. He kissed the elder male on the forehead and stood up. "Come on, I'm hungry." Itachi chuckled and followed Naruto, his own stomach growling. They both knew that they couldn't afford to stay cooped up inside the room all day. Things needed to be worked on and they each had a job to attend. But if only for a few hours of the day, it was nice to believe that it was just them and no one else. 3 days later, Naruto slipped into the bedroom, waiting for Itachi to come back. They were laying the plans to take out Orochimaru's warehouse on the 21 stone, a few hours before his own plans were to take effect. He squirmed nervously on the bed, trying to find a comfortable position. The sound of the door had him sitting back up and he watched Itachi enter the room, closing the door behind him. "How'd it go?" he asked. "Everything is laid out, now we wait," Itachi answered and crossed over to the bed, sitting down next to Naruto. He grunted as Naruto launched himself onto his back, circling his arms around his neck and placing kisses on the exposed skin. "You know that I'll always protect you, right?" he murmured. Itachi nodded and opened his mouth to speak, but Naruto cut him off. "And I know that you'll make a great leader, just don't forget your goals." Itachi chuckled and dragged Naruto around so he could sit on his lap. "What are you trying to say?" he asked, nipping at the tanned skin. "I will," he stated furiously, "always protect you, no matter what happens around us." Itachi pulled back at the serious tone Naruto had taken on. His eyes searched Naruto's face, but he found nothing to explain the sudden change in attitude. He blinked as Naruto's hands came up to cup his face, drawing him in closer. "And I will always," he looked into Itachi's eyes, "love you." Itachi's mouth descended on his, making him gasp at the suddenness of it. He pressed back with equal passion, wanting nothing more than for the older male to understand his feelings. Itachi's tongue slipped inside his mouth, intent on deepening the kiss, and Naruto's back arched as his fingers traced over his body. When they broke apart, they were gasping for breath and Naruto rested his forehead against Itachi's. "I want you," he murmured, running his finger over his chest. Itachi's fingers slipped underneath his shirt, pushing it over his head. Once the garment was on the floor, he captured Naruto's lips again and slowly pushed him back until he was resting on the bed. They separated and Itachi looked into darkened blue eyes, looking for any doubt. Seeing none, he shed his own shirt and hovered over Naruto. "I will always love you too," he said softly, kissing Naruto's temple. Naruto closed his eyes and hummed. "I know," he said and raised his wrist to Itachi's lips. "I've always been yours." Itachi kissed the ink marring the tanned skin and started to move down his arm until he reached Naruto's chest. He placed kisses across the available skin, moving down towards the tented pants and placed one more kiss above the waistband. "Allow me to give you pleasure," he muttered. Naruto nodded and Itachi continued. A slight breeze blew between the tall buildings that overlooked the city. Behind them, large warehouses outlined the docks where the stars reflected on the water's surface. Above, the moon was absent from the sky and only a few thin clouds floated across the sky. Traffic was light on the main roads, due to the late hour, and non-existent on the hidden back roads. Roadblocks were set up to keep the public away from the more exclusive buildings, and those who needed to be bribed were already away, patrolling other areas. Over the city, a lone hawk flew across the skies silently. A small collar rested around its ankle, recording everything and sending images to those below. Area 1 and 3 are secured. Armored trucks moving into Section 2, stand by for further details. Nodding to the voice crackling in his ear, Naruto slipped around the edge of a pillar. The parking garage was empty, all cars gone for the night. His eyes quickly located the surveillance cameras and eased along the side of the wall, staying in the blind spot. His gun was slung over his back and 2 others rested on his body, waiting to be used. In his hand, a large black duffel bag swung heavily. 4 more feet in front of you will be the first hole. About 5 inches from the ceiling. What about the others? Naruto asked, creeping forward. His eyes spotted the small hole and his hand slipped inside the bag, pulling out a small cylinder tube. Flicking the small switch on the side, a small red light clicked on and he eased the tube into the hole. They're making their way up the fire escapes. Snipers are reporting that the armed trucks are stopped and being checked. How many people are inside? We're not sure yet, no one has come out or gone in yet. The building could be empty right now for all we know. Naruto grunted and grabbed another tube. That's not good news. I thought Intel had everything covered. We're not gods, Naruto, there's going to be things that we can't predict, the voice said. Tell me when the supports are armed. The small transmitter clicked off in Naruto's ear, leaving him in silence again as he continued to work. The bag was almost empty now of the explosives and Naruto spun around the parking structure, making sure that all the founding pillars that supported the building were covered. It took a lot of explosives to take out a large building, and it was more about spreading them out compared to grouping them together. 2 hours ago, Naruto had sent the first group in with instructions to start placing the bombs in the walls. The city fire code required that all buildings over 3 stories have to fire escape exits inside the building. While it would help to save lives, it also provided a way to get inside the building without being noticed. 2 fire escapes were located in opposite corners of the building and each stairwell had 2 groups working in them. While one group drilled small holes near the support beams, another group was placing small bombs filled with nanothermite in the holes. If the bombs in the structure were detonated first, it would weaken the building and cause strain on the structure. After that, the ones in the garage would be used to bring the building toppling to the ground. It would be the best way to take out the building without causing much damage to anything else around it. The only downside to using nanothermite was that it left traces of dust in the rubble, easily identifying what had brought the building down. However, when the only supplier of nanothermite suddenly turns up dead outside of the same building that was brought down with the explosive, police would be more likely to believe that a deal had gone sour. It was killing 2 birds with 1 stone and Naruto planned on using that to their advantage. Garage is secured, he stated into the headset and pulled out the small pistol from its holder. I'm going inside the building, where's my spotter? Waiting for you besides the elevator, he's been keeping watch. Naruto nodded and moved alongside the walls, making sure to stay hidden in the shadows. Ahead, the faint flickering of the light over the elevator cast dancing ghosts along the floor and wall. His finger rested above to the trigger, while his other hand supported the gun. It wasn't his favorite one, especially when compared to his sniper rifle, but he had been trained to handle both long and short-range combat. And today was a mix of both. He froze as the smell of copper filled his nose and he crouched lower, eyes sweeping over the area. Someone else was here and it wasn't one of his men. If his spotter had shot someone, he would have radioed it in during the fight. Resting his back against the stone pillar, Naruto quickly reviewed the room's layout in his mind. There was one light up over the elevator and he had no idea where the other shooter was waiting. And there was a high possibility that they were using a silencer as well. He could chance shooting out the light and hope that his eyes adjusted quickly, or he could try to draw out the shooter. Both options put him in a bad spot, even though it was unlikely that the shooter had night goggles. But with it being a dark room to begin with, Naruto didn't want to take the chance. There was always the option of throwing a grenade, but that meant giving away his position even more and possibly risking the chance of setting off the other explosives. It was a stalemate and any possible chance of breaking it included risk to himself. Naruto frowned. It didn't help that he didn't know where the person was. He could be on the other side of the wall, or behind the other wall across from him. He needed to know that before he could do anything else. Breathing out slowly, Naruto gripped the pistol tighter and tossed the empty duffel bag. It sliced through the air and landed loudly on the other side of him. When nothing happened, Naruto nodded, knowing where his opponent sat. A bullet exploded the concrete pot that a fern sat in and Naruto's hand reached for the second gun. Pulling it out quickly, he took aim in the direction that the shots were fired from and started firing back. The concrete dust was heavy in the air as he bolted from his position and his eyes watered from the powder. Another bullet landed behind him, nearly clipping his shoulder, and he turned towards the side, shooting both guns down the hallway. There was no one behind him as he backed up and he could clearly see his shooter now. They were both out in the open, with nowhere to hide behind, and standing still wasn't going to do Naruto any good. His calf muscles tightened before his legs broke into a run, one gun shooting while the other stayed cocked and ready. He watched the face of his shooter transform into confusion as he grew closer, before panic settled in. It was always harder to hit a moving target than a standing one, although there was always the chance that a hit could still land on your body. Aiming for the Mont's torso, he fired off rapid shots, knocking him backwards. The gun dropped from his hands in shock as he stumbled around, trying to find his balance. Without wasting a second, Naruto squeezed the trigger, the bullet finding its home in the man's head. The body collapsed heavily and Naruto panted for breath, adrenaline racing through his body. He took a step forward and winced, feeling warmth running down his side. A curse left his mouth as he looked at the blood soaking through his clothes. The adrenaline had blocked pain for a short time, but now it was quickly coming back. His hands lifted up the material, examining the wound. It was a clean shot, one that hadn't stayed in the body, and Naruto tore at his shirt. Once the wound was dressed, he looked around for his spotter, finding the body propped up against the elevator door. "Boss, I think they know we're here," he said softly, blood trickling from a large wound. "I'm sorry I couldn't stop him." "How long ago?" Naruto asked. 15 minutes. Naruto didn't answer and instead opened the comm link again. "They know we're here. Tell all forces in the building to get out now. They should have most of the floors covered by now. It'll fall since the lower levels will be destroyed," he ordered. "Naruto," the voice answered, sounding in slight shock. "He didn't tell them." "What?" he asked. "The guard on the first floor. He didn't radio anything in, probably thinking that he could get the glory to himself." Relief washed through Naruto's body. "Fine, we're still continuing as planned then." He looked at his watch. "The guest should be through the checkpoints and will be entering the lobby in a few minutes. Have everything ready for my call and tell everyone to pull out." An affirmative was spoken over the radio and Naruto looked up from his work. The wound on his partner was still spotting blood, but the massive flow had slowed down. He pulled the man to his feet and slung his arm around his shoulders. They limped towards the exit and Naruto pushed him towards the waiting van. "Get yourself to a doctor." The younger male nodded and limped away, knowing better than to argue at a direct order. After making sure he was gone, Naruto slipped inside the waiting building before striding over to the elevator. The building belonged to an ally of the Akatsuki and made Naruto nervous using it, but it was critical for the mission. Emerging on the 5th floor a few minutes later, Naruto crept through the silent hallways until he reached the empty room that was located across the street from the main boardroom. It would give them a perfect position to take out everyone inside the room. The third force that Naruto had sent in was waiting and they nodded briefly to him before fanning out to cover the floor. Knowing that the area was clear, Naruto knelt down and set up his equipment, taking aim through the open window. Targets are making their way into the room. "Is everyone out of the building?" "Yes, once you gave the warning, they moved towards the roof and were able to rappel safely down the backside of the building." "Good, tell all snipers to stand by. Section Gamma fires first, followed by Omega and then Beta." Naruto's finger rested on the gun and he hissed as he put weight on his injury. He was going to be taking the first shot, so that way everyone knew when the last part of the mission had begun. There was a small hope that confusion would erupt in the room and the members would turn on each other, but it was only a tiny factor in their plans. Either way, bodies would fall, from either their weapons or someone else's. Naruto watched as the group settled around the table. The entire top floor was surrounded by windows, since all top CEOs wanted an office with a view. It also allowed them to watch the streets and people around them, in case someone unwanted was approaching them. He blinked before looking through his scope, adjusting the dial one last time. The crosshair was set on his intended target and his finger curled around the trigger. "All groups stand by until the target falls," Naruto said into the radio and lowered his eyes to the scope once more. Taking in a deep breath and letting it out slowly, his finger squeezed the trigger, pulling it back towards him. The gun recoiled underneath him and he ground his teeth together as it put pressure on his wound, but didn't make a sound. Instead, he watched through the scope as the body in the crosshair dropped to the ground. Action in the room seemed to freeze for a brief second before everyone started to move at once. Several people started to drop to the floor as more gunshots started to penetrate the room. "Set off the main explosives," Naruto said, adjusting his scope for his second target. "Everyone hold fire." The area fell silent, except for the firm countdown over the radios in Naruto's ear as he watched several heads poke up cautiously from their hiding spot, only to be tossed back as the building was racked with harsh tremors. Glass shattered everywhere, sending it falling to the ground in a deadly waterfall that covered the concrete ground. Small chunks of concrete and steel smashed into the ground and cars surrounding the building, while black smoke billowed out from the open windows. Fire filled the room along with fallen power cords that sparked dangerously atop the ceiling, making any survivors in the room duck low to the ground. They crawled to the door, desperate to escape, only to find the door covered by small pieces of plaster from the walls. Watching one of the members crawl to the open window, Naruto took careful aim, waiting for him to drag his body over the jagged pieces of glass. As soon as his head was visible, he squeezed the trigger and the body slumped down on the edge of the building. "Trigger the nanothermite in the walls," Naruto called. There was a moment of hesitation in which he looked away from the scope before balls of fire exploded along the outer walls of the building, sending white smoke pouring into the night sky. The building swayed on its foundation as the steel supports struggled to find some sort of balance on the two remaining supports. A loud groan echoed across the area as parts of the steel started to buckle under the strain of holding up higher levels of the building. "We have cops coming our way. They've broken up the forces at the warehouse since the fire is almost under control. ETA, 15 minutes. Is there any way to slow them down? We're trying, but we can't add any more roadblocks without raising suspicion." Naruto nodded and opened up the communication link again. "All groups pull back," he ordered. "Snipers, move towards the safe houses that you picked out and don't move until the all-clear has been given." Confirmation was given to Naruto and he moved back slowly from the weapon. It wasn't a weapon style that the Uchihas used, but one instead that Orochimaru was known to deal. It had taken careful negotiations a year ago to get them, but in the end, the gang members that Naruto bought them from finally agreed. "We have a problem." Naruto paused as he moved away from the weapon, strapping it on his back. "What's going on?" "Orochimaru's gone." Naruto's blood ran cold and he bolted from the room. He was supposed to deliver the final blow to the man with a weapon used by the Akatsuki. Their whole plan circled around the forensic ballistics found at the scene, and Orochimaru was supposed to die by an Akatsuki hand. "Get me his location now," he ordered, sprinting down the stairs. "We have eyes in the sky. Have them start searching the city." He emerged from the building and cocked the handgun. They were going to finish this as planned, and he was going to be the one to put the bullet in the man's head. In order for the plan to look as though it was a weapon deal gone bad, an Akatsuki bullet had to be at the scene. "Trackers have him located," the voice crackled in his ear. "He's at the entrance to the building. Orders? Be ready to blow the garage at my command and don't worry about me. We're still following the original plan no matter what happens." In the distance, Naruto could hear the screaming of sirens and he took in a deep breath as he sprinted across the street. He could see Orochimaru walking out of the entrance and he fired at him, forcing the man to step back. Angry eyes glared at him before Orochimaru turned and bolted back inside the burning building. Naruto cursed and chased after the man, coughing at the smoke that blew in his face. His eyes watered as he looked around, trying to find the man through the haze. A heavy blow to the back of his head made him stumble forward, black spots appearing in his vision, and his gun flew from his hands. He spun around and barely had time to duck as part of a waiting room chair was swung at his head. He squatted down and swung his leg out, catching Orochimaru off balance. The man snarled as he struggled to regain balance, his arms flaying around. Standing up, Naruto kicked the man in the face and the sickening sound of bone breaking was heard. Turning around, Naruto ran towards the fallen gun, only to yell as he was tackled to the ground. His arm was twisted around his back harshly, and he grunted as his shoulder popped out of place. Outside, he could hear the sirens growing louder and knew he was running out of time. A knife glittered in his view as it swooped low, ready to slice his neck. Grunting, he snapped his head back, catching the man in the face, and the grip loosened as he howled in pain. "Set of the explosives," he ordered, panting for breath. Now, he ran for his gun while Orochimaru withered on the floor, clutching his already broken nose. Beneath them, the floor rumbled and the ground bucked upwards, sending him flying across the surface of the floor. He scrambled for the fallen weapon once the tremors stopped, already seeing flashing lights outside the building. Above, the steel structure was groaning loudly, the strain starting to become too much. Wiping the blood and dust from his face, Naruto stalked to Orochimaru and glared down at him. Without saying a word, he aimed the weapon and squeezed the trigger. The body slumped instantly and blood pooled behind the heavy head. Gasping for breath, Naruto limped away from the dead body. His body hurt and refused to move, but he willed himself forward towards his way out. Another loud groan sounded above his head, followed by the ear-piercing scream of metal twisting and snapping. Naruto's eyes widened and he broke into a run towards the exit, as all around him, the building started to buckle and collapse. At the Uchiha mansion, a celebration was already in full swing, everyone toasting their new success. The mission to take out Orochimaru's hideout and stop his weapon dealing went off without a hitch and there was plenty to celebrate. Itachi smirked as everyone congratulated him for bringing down the weapon lord and his operations. He refused to hold a toast though, until Naruto was back from wherever he had vanished to, knowing that the mission had only been successful due to his actions. He sipped his wine slowly, wondering where Naruto was. Naruto didn't work tonight and wasn't out training either. A frown slipped across his face and his stomach churned uneasily. The doors to the room opened and everyone grew silent at the group that entered slowly. While their bodies looked fine, outside of dust and blood covering them, their eyes held a sad gaze to them. "What happened?" he demanded, striding across the floor. He felt someone grab his arm and he spun around, ready to snap at whoever was keeping him from finding answers. His voice died though as he saw Sasuke holding his arm, looking everywhere but at him. Behind Sasuke, his father was approaching them slowly and the uneasiness in his stomach grew. "Itachi, there's something you need to know," he started slowly. "There was another mission tonight, one that took out a major building belonging to Akatsuki." Itachi swallowed and looked back towards the dust-covered group. They refused to look at him and he knew something had gone horribly wrong. "What happened?" he asked again. "It was a successful mission and a brilliantly thought-out plan. Orochimaru was being inducted into the Akatsuki tonight, and they used that to take him out. The police will believe that it was Gun's deal gone bad, leaving us free from any suspicion." "But," his father looked away, pain etched across his face. "There was a causality," he said. "In order to make it look as though Akatsuki killed Orochimaru, the leader of the group had to deliver the final blow. They fought inside the building before he shot Orochimaru, but he didn't escape the collapsing building safely." Itachi turned back towards the group, watching as tears slid down their face, cutting a clean trail through the dirt and dust. Movement in the back of the group caught his attention and he watched as a group member slowly moved forward, holding something white in his arms. "Who was the leader?" Itachi asked. When no one answered, he growled. "Tell me, Itachi," Sasuke whispered, drawing his brother's gaze to him. With tears in his eyes, he met Itachi's eyes. It was Naruto. Silence filled the room as Itachi absorbed the sentence before his eyes swept back to the group, settling on the male holding the white object. An object that looked too similar to a human body. Finally, he shook his head. "No," he muttered, his mind refusing to believe Sasuke. 10 hours ago, Naruto was lying next to him in bed, running his fingers through his hair while they talked softly. He could even remember the conversation that they had. It wasn't possible that Naruto was dead. Sasuke's fingers tightened around his arm. "Don't you dare go and become all depressed now or get mad at him either," he choked out, fighting back the tears that threatened to overtake him. "He would want you to move on and become the overlord that he knew you would be. Don't tarnish his memory." Itachi pulled away from Sasuke's grip. "I know," he said quietly. "I need to be alone now." No one tried to stop him as he moved through the large room, not seeing anything around him. He moved without any thought to his room and locked the door behind him. Once there, he slid down the surface of the door and looked up at the ceiling, feeling tears forming. And he cried for what once was, and for what could have been. Dead eyes watched as the wet dirt slowly filled the large hole. It had been a week since Naruto's death, but he had only come to terms with it 2 days ago. The pain hurt, much more than he expected, and he knew that no one would ever be able to replace Naruto. He couldn't even fathom trying to find someone to take Naruto's spot. There was no other when it came to the blonde. He had fallen hard for Naruto, he knew that now, and the fact that he was gone only made things harder. His chest ached at the thought of moving on, and he knew that the ache would always remain, but he would continue forward. It was what Naruto would have wanted him to do. Blinking slowly, he turned away from the grave and walked back to his family. They had work to do, and they would continue as planned. Watch me, Naruto. I'm going to make you proud.
That's all for now. If you enjoy this video, then please like, share and do comments.